Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back from lunch. There were a lot of conversations going on in the foyer outside. And welcome back to those of you joining us online this afternoon. So, we have a packed and busy afternoon, but hopefully a stimulating and enjoyable one. Our next session is called The Future of Democracy and Pluralism. How can we reverse illiberal trends? I'm going to introduce your speakers and moderator, as I've usually been doing. So we are privileged to have Henna Verkunen, Executive Vice President, Tech Sovereignty, Security and Democracy at the European Commission. Joining us online, and I think the connection works now, Alexandra Matvichuk, Head of the Ukrainian Center for Civil Liberties. And Alexandra is also a Nobel Peace Prize laureate, winning that in 2022 for the work of her center. Joining us as well, we have Dr. Kevin Casasamura, Secretary General, International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance. Welcome. And with him, Bart Shevchik, who works in public policy at Covington and Burling LLP, but also a non-resident senior fellow at the German Marshall Fund. Our moderator for this session is Paul Adamson, founder and publisher of Encompass. I'm going to invite you, Executive Vice President, straight to the lectern to give to speak, or you can sit there as you wish, but I think to the lectern. And also, she will have to leave us at 2:30 sharp, so a very busy and packed agenda. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and also welcome back from my side. So after talking about the moving geopolitical environment this morning, I'm very pleased now to introduce the first session of the afternoon, which will discuss democracy and pluralism, as we heard. In 1997, in an article published in Foreign Affairs, Ferd Zakaria presented the rise of illiberal democracy. And this is used to describe a system with competitive elections, but in which checks and balances are weakened due to populistic or authoritarian forces seeking to control key institutions and also to curtail certain freedoms. And now we are facing a pressing threat to democracy, as we see, that we absolutely need to address also, the threat posed by foreign interference and also information manipulation. Democracy is about bringing together different voices in society and finding common solutions. This is at the core of our European project, because authoritarians, they see democracy as a threat. Their regimes seek to erode our citizens' trust in democracy. They do so by stringing different divisions, instrumentalizing our conflicts and also discrediting democratic actors and trying to undermine also free and fair elections. We see this every day with the hybrid attacks waged online and also offline against the EU as a project, but also against EU member states and also our neighboring countries. In addition to its war of aggression against Ukraine, Russia is deploying information warfare tactics that aim to reach deep into the fabric of our societies, spreading false narratives to manipulate our public opinion. Cyber attacks and disinformation campaigns, they are combined in influence operations, as we have seen, and they also involve the use of online influencers. We saw this in an unprecedented scale during the general elections in Moldova in September. We saw that Moldova was under very hard pressure, and it was combined, different disinformation campaigns. They were combined, for example, with the massive cyber attacks. This new initiative we made yesterday, the Democracy Shield, sets out now very concrete actions to enhance our capacity to detect and counter foreign interference and information manipulation campaigns, as well as to boost our societal resilience. In this respect, I would like to mention one of our flagship actions, the creation of European Centre for Democratic Resilience. This centre will bring together all the expertise and capacity on situational awareness across our member states and also neighbouring countries. This is the beginning of a long-term evaluative process to ensure that we have the necessary tools to strengthen our collective preparedness. When taking steps today, we should not lose track of the broader picture and the constantly evolving nature of threats. This is where the longer-term perspective is also very essential. In the EU, we are used to plan ahead with the adoption every 7 years a long-term budget. And our next proposal for our next MFF is designed to offer more flexibility across our budget so that Europe has the capacity to act and also react fast when circumstances change unexpectedly. We know that nowadays the multi-annual financial framework we are having now, 90% of our funds, they were pre-allocated when we make the decisions in 2020. And very fast after that, we were facing COVID pandemic, and after that, Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine. And we didn't have, and we don't have very much flexibilities in our budget when we have already earmarked 90% of the funds to certain sectors. And that's why now we are proposing much more flexibility in our budget, because we don't know what kind of new challenges we are facing in 2030, for example. So we need to have also some room for maneuver there also in the coming years. Most importantly, when we look also how we are allocating the funds, we are paying much more now attention for competitiveness of European Union, but also to our security. And of course, very important part of that is our democratic participation and civil discourse, and also our civil society organizations, so-called societal resilience, what we can build when we are investing to our human capital in member states. And that's why we proposed the so-called Agora EU program, and it will particularly contribute to enhance our democratic participation and also societal resilience. And for the first time, it brings also together actions in support of free and independent media, and in support of democracy, citizens' engagement, equality, rights and values. Looking beyond the next few years helps us to see what is truly important. We know that there is no democracy without freedom of expression and freedom of information. But to preserve these very essential freedoms, we must look at the whole information ecosystem. Pluralism should not be limited to traditional news media, but also should apply on online world. We need to create a level playing field for all media actors, old and new, to ensure that they all have the same opportunities. At the end of the day, our first line of defense against manipulation attempts is our population. Engaged, informed and empowered citizens and an active civil society, they are the backbone of our democracies. This is why we need to support our media and digital literacy, critical thinking and civic education across the whole population. This is an investment in the future of our democracies. These skills, they empower all of us to make informed choices in our lives and to better detect and respond to manipulation attempts. With this, ladies and gentlemen, I look very much forward to hearing your views, and I pass on the floor to Paul Adamson for kicking off the panel discussion.
Thank you very much, Henna, for that. What we're going to do, since the Commissioner has to leave at 2:30, is I'm going to ask you a couple of questions now and make the most of our precious time together. Invite the panel to react to any parts of your opening remarks they would like to react to before they get their own formal slot. And we'll take it from there, okay? If I may, Henna, I'd like to start with what somebody mentioned towards the end about the it starts now with the trying to educate citizens, right, to be more aware. Our first line of defense, as you say, is against manipulation attempts. It's our population. They need to be engaged, informed, and empowered. What is the role both of the member states and the European Union more broadly to provide that education and sensitization capacity? I think it's on.
I'm responsible of the technology, so we're going to see if I can open the microphone. Yes. Personally, I see that this is always maybe the most challenging part also when we speak about our resilience, security and competitiveness, because I see that this is very much, of course, based to our education and skills among our citizens. And at the same time, we know that this is, of course, it's competence of member states when we are speaking about educational systems. So, and at the same time, we can't have very strong security or competitiveness if we don't have good quality of education and good digital literacy, also good media literacy. And that's why it's important, of course, that we are coordinating the actions in the European Union level, and we are also exchanging best practices. We have also, of course, certain projects in the European Union framework, also when it comes to digitalization, media literacy, and we are also now launching new projects on that. But of course, we can't touch all the citizens with that. So I see that member states and regions and municipalities, their educational systems, of course, are playing the most important role. And that's why we have to raise awareness and also exchange best practices among the different stakeholders. Also, it's important to involve our industry here, because often the people are already in working life who need also digital skills, for example, and who need more media literacy also to have the tools, analyze and critically think also the information they see. But this is, of course, this has to be a very joint effort together with European Union, with our member states, regions, municipalities, educational institutions, and also public sector and industry. So everybody is really needed for that. But I see that this is key for the better future, that the people themselves, we are empowering the people, and they are able also to analyze and critically think the information they see.
So you say that we have to look at the whole information ecosystem here. Pluralism should not be limited to traditional news media, but also the online platforms. We need to create a level playing field for all media actors. What do you mean by that specifically?
Yeah, we see that our news media is very much under pressure now, and especially because of the digitalization and new online services, many people are not buying newspapers like they used to do, and especially among younger generations, often social media is the main source of news. And of course, we see that this is having really impacts to our society. Of course, if the young generation is just following some influencers on TikTok, and this is like their main source of news, so it's for sure that it's having impact to their thinking and for their ideas about the society and the world. And that's why, of course, it's very important that we are also supporting our media, also to update their services and also to reach audience, also in the era of the digital times. But in the same time, important to really create more level playing field on online world. Now we know that big tech, they are very much also attracting all the advertising there, and so our news media is very much under economic pressure, because people are not paying off the content anymore like they used to do, and also the advertising is going very much to online platforms. And that's why, for example, via our Digital Markets Act, we want to create more level playing field for the digital world, that the gatekeepers, that they can't, for example, block new innovations from the market, and they can't misuse the very dominant market power. I see that this is very important part now when we try to support our media to create more level playing field in digital world. But in the same time, we are also planning to support financially more our news media. So it's new element on the Agora EU program. So earlier we haven't had that kind of tools, also to support our quality journalism and news media.
So a final question from me, Hannah, before I ask the panel to react to your comments. You mentioned yesterday the Commission announced the Democracy Shield. I don't expect you to agree, but a lot of people who responded to the proposal have been rather critical, and they're pointing to essentially if I'm correct, the voluntary nature of the Democracy Shield. It's not an obligation for member states to join in. Is that a fundamental weakness, and why is it voluntary? Was that just political expediency?
Yeah, we saw, I think, two kinds of reactions. So some people said that we are really now limiting freedom of speech and freedom of expression with the Democracy Shield ideas. And some people saw that this is too weak, that we should propose more like a really shield also to protect our democracies. And of course, we have to combine really, because freedom, of course, is very important part of our society and it's really core value of European Union, freedom of expression, freedom of speech. But in the same time, we have to really protect our societies and democracies from information manipulation, from disinformation, propaganda, that kind of efforts. And it's important to have balance here. But the main elements in our democracy shield is very much educating, empowering our citizens to give tools for them, also analyze and make their decisions themselves, but really to support of media, very important part that the people have access also to accurate information, and especially also protection of our democratic institutions, especially electoral processes, super important, and also enforcing our digital rules when it comes to online platforms, because we know that social media is having big impacts also to our civic discourse, and it's very important channel for information, especially during the electoral campaigns, but we have to make sure that online platforms, they are not misused or manipulated during the electoral processes, so we have to also take more efforts in this side. But freedom, of course, is very important value for us, and in the same time we have to balance the actions that we don't want to limit the freedom of expression here, but in the same time we have to protect our democracies.
Thank you, Anna. Alexandra, would you like to respond briefly to what the Commission has been saying in her opening remarks before I give you the floor more formally in a couple of minutes' time?
I have very brief comment. I'm from the country that is bravely resistant to Russian war of aggression. And I know that the war has not just military, but also other dimension as well. Economic dimension, cyber dimension, trade dimension, value dimension, and informational dimension. And in this regard, this war has already crossed the European Union borders, because this is a war for hearts and minds of people. And what we see for current moment, more generally, that people spend more and more time in digital reality, which is overloaded with fake, hate, propaganda. They became extremely vulnerable to external manipulation. They start to lose their ability to make a distinction between lie and truth. And now even people in this one small community have no more a shared sense of reality. Without shared sense of reality, people are not able to do common actions. Without common actions, how we will protect our freedom and democracy?
Thank you. Do you want to respond to Hannah?
I think this is, of course, this is very important topic you underlined, and we see it very, very clearly every day that after that, when Russia started full-scale war against Ukraine, they have been massively also increasing different kind of hybrid operations in the European Union. So we see really cyber attacks, different migrations, they have been used as weapons in the borders. So we see sabotage in our critical infrastructure, GPS jamming, now also these drones flying over our critical infrastructure, and of course different kind of propaganda, fake news, and all kind of actions where how hostile actors, they try to destabilize our societies and really put division between the people and create mistrust among citizens. And that's why the role of the citizens is so crucial, that we can strengthen and empower our citizens, and they have the tools also to work together in this. And especially we see that some member states are more under pressure, and especially those countries which are not members of European Union yet, but who are willing to join European Union, they are under massive pressure. And we have to support these democracies, of course, with all our actions.
Kevin, do you have a reaction to the Commissioner's opening remarks?
Sure. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation to be here, and thank you, Vice President Virkkunen, for the thoughts and the reflections that you shared with us. My reflection is very simple. I mean, I'm very happy to see a more fully formed version of the European Democracy Shield now, with priorities that I think are the right ones. I mean, what is in there makes eminent sense if you want to protect democracies in Europe. And my only thought is that I would love to see the same level of ambition on the part of the European Union, the same level of ambition when it comes to protecting democracy outside of Europe. I guess this is a recognition of the absolutely irreplaceable and unique role that the EU has in that global struggle for democracy, particularly now that the United States has ostensibly retreated from supporting that struggle. So Europe, and I mean,
you may be making into a question to the Commissioner. You have your chance to speak at the moment. Sorry,
so I guess my question is whether there will be a similar level of ambition when it comes to supporting democracy outside of Europe, and whether we can at least hope and dream that this will get reflected into the upcoming financial framework of the EU.
Apologies for interrupting, Kevin. Anna?
Very good. Of course, this has been always our ambition, that we want to protect democracy all over the world, and it has been always very important for European Union. But we see that nowadays there's not so many partners globally when we speak about democracy and freedom, and these are of course core values what we want to promote globally, and it's important for us to engage also with countries all over the world. And this is, of course, main principle still in our actions to promote freedom and democracy all over the world. But we see that nowadays, where we are globally, there is not so many partners who are joining our efforts here, but it's still basis for our actions. In the same time, when we look at the global situation, it's also clear that Europe can't be strong enough globally if we are not able to also defend ourselves. And I speak about military and defense, because we see that now the technological race is very hard globally, and security and defense is very much connected to that. And Europe has been very dependent, because we have been always very open for global investments and investors, and our industry has built very global value chains. But we see that these dependencies, they can be weaponized against us, and that's why we are in a very challenging position right now, because we have to really build up our own capacities when it comes to technologies and also defense part, that we are able to defend ourselves and we are competitive, and then we are also stronger to support and promote democracy in the global stage.
And a final quick reaction from you, Bart, please.
Maybe just a quick question in the interest of time. Thank you very much, first of all, for your great remarks. And a question, one of the assumptions of ESPAS and the exercise of foresight is that you try to look into the future and see what different scenarios might arise and how we might get there for the good scenarios, and how do we avoid the bad scenarios. So let's focus on the good scenarios. If you, let's say, look forward 4 years, 5 years from now, how different do you think our democracies in Europe will look as they interrelate with technology? You mentioned that technology can empower citizens, empower our students in schools to make them more informed, better educated. Of course, there are some challenges to technology as well. But if everything goes right and all the decisions are made to make it right, what sort of future can we expect 4 or 5 years from now in terms of technology and democracy?
I think when it comes to democracy and especially the foreign interference we are now facing, it's crucial, of course, that what is happening in Ukraine. So I see clearly that we have to beat Russians in Ukraine, because so long that when they continue the war there, we see also that they are very aggressively also attacking us all the time. So there's very clear connection to that. But also inside in our societies, of course, we see many very harmful developments there, and especially I'm worried about this, that younger generation, especially younger generation, that they are not reading anymore, and also the educational, I think, often the learning outcomes, they are a little bit going down all the time and not getting better like they should, and also that how we are able also to now work with the technological developments, because we see that now the technology has somehow overtaken many of our citizens, that it's more that the technology is leading, because it should be always, of course, we as a human beings who are in control. But now we see, for example, that some of the services, they are very addictive, and the people are using more and more time online. And now when AI is combined for that, of course, there is clearly risks that people are not thinking themselves anymore, and they are very dependent on technologies, and the technology is like taking the leadership, and the people are not in the controller's place. But that's why I see that it's so important that we are investing in education, and we are making sure that our citizens are also, they are having the tools also to navigate in this very complex world. But I think that we can succeed in that, but of course everybody has to take very seriously now the situation where we are. And I have said it already many times, but I say that very much the education is very much key for a better future everywhere in the world.
Well, okay, we have to let you go. We've had more than a fair share of your time, Hannah, this afternoon. Thank you so much. We'll let you go to your next appointment and release you.
Yeah, have a good have a good discussion.
And thanks to the Executive Vice President. And now we go back to the panel, and it's my great personal pleasure to turn back to Alexander to thank you personally, Alexander, for being with us this afternoon. It's not every day we get to talk to a Nobel Peace Prize laureate, that's for sure. Maybe as a first question, maybe you'd like to continue your thoughts, because I had to interrupt you for reasons of time when you're reacting to Hannah's opening remarks about how the information war goes beyond national borders, and maybe the rest of Europe doesn't quite appreciate that because they're so focused on the military aspect of the invasion. Go ahead.
Probably I will start with more general problem, which is fundamental to be solved, because now we try to impose just short-term strategy. We have to know the roots of the problem to be able to develop long-term strategy. 80% people in the globe live in non-free or partially free societies. This means that people who have a real right to vote for whom they want to vote, who have a real right to say what they want to say, people who have human rights and freedoms, they are minority. And the problem is not just in fact that in authoritarian countries, the space for freedom is shrinking to the size of the prison cell. The problem is that even in developed democracies, people start to put into questions the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And there are reasons for this. The current generation inherited their freedom from their grandparents. They start to take human rights for granted. They became consumers of democracy, and they consider freedom as a possibility to make a choice between different cheeses in supermarket. And that is why we observe the trend in well-developed democracies that during elections, more and more people attend to exchange their freedom for populist claim, for economic benefits, but first and foremost for their own comfort. And in addition to this, people are disappointed with democracy. Yet democracy is not ideal. There are a lot of unsolved problems, for example, social inequality, and we can make a huge list of problems. And people have a right to be angry and disappointed, but authoritarian regimes don't solve this problem either. The only difference is that people have no right to complain. And I think that one of our problem that we start to think that freedom and democracy is a final answer, and we stop to promote it. And we have to explain people that we have to do two tasks parallel to protect our democracy and to perfect our democracy, because we have no alternative. The alternative to our non-ideal democracy, it's a hell of authoritarian regimes. And I know what I'm talking about because just 12 years ago, people in Ukraine were fighting against pro-Russian, corrupt, authoritarian Yanukovych regime. And to conclude, modern authoritarian regimes, they have no common ideology. However, they promote common narratives. They try to present that authoritarianism means stability and strength, and democracy means slowness and ineffectiveness. They attack humanistic ideas like independent court, freedom of the press, human rights. We have to step in this value battle because these decades of freedom, which started after the fall of the Berlin Wall, can very easily change to decades of survival. But the hope is that Europe is not just about geography. Europe is more about values. So we must protect them.
If I may, Alexander, if I understand you correctly, you're describing a phenomenon which does predate by quite some time Russia's full-scale invasion of your country. And there's clearly, as you depicted, a negative trend going on for quite some time. To what extent do you think this trend, a question I will ask other members of the panel, by the way, is this trend irreversible? Is you're always fighting, to use the awful expression, a losing battle?
I think that people in Ukraine are sincerely fighting for freedom because we have never had the luxury to be in comfort. We restored our independence only 3 decades ago. Only 12 years ago, after Revolution of Dignity, we got our chance to build democratic institutions. And in order to stop us on this way, Russia invaded. So we are doing this for 12 years, not in a peaceful time, but in a time of war. So when I speak about this questioning of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, I mostly speak about Western societies, because for decades, Western societies was an example for people from transitional democracy. But now something bad is going on in well-developed democracies. There are a lot of dangerous bells, which probably people there don't know because they have no idea how to live in unfreedom. But we who have this experience, we clearly hear these bells.
Thank you, Alexander. I need to turn now to the other members of the panel and to you, Kevin, after I unfortunately interrupted you, which I hope you will forgive me. You were making the case that, and making the very bold assertion that you were very dissatisfied with the extent to which, if I understand you correctly, the European Union was tackling the illiberalism outside its frontiers, outside the continent of Europe, in fact. So maybe now is your opportunity to amplify and develop your argument, please.
No, I'm not dissatisfied. No, quite to the contrary. And I recognize, I acknowledge the importance of the role that the EU has been playing in the recent past in supporting democracy. And it's precisely because I acknowledge that I would like to see that reflected in the work of the EU going forward. Because, and the international context has changed in a dramatic way when it comes to supporting democracy with the retreat of the US. So whatever Europe has been doing to support democracy over the recent past it's even more essential now than it was. Number one. And I guess, I mean, I would add that this is also fundamental because the EU cannot see itself as a garden of democracy surrounded by a sea of authoritarianism in different hues. I mean, that's not a sustainable future. So whatever happens outside of Europe matters for Europe, of course. My second point, if you allow some interaction between the panelists, I fully agree with Alexandra in terms of I agree that the case for democracy remains very robust, but I take issue, and it's no more than a footnote, with this assertion that there's no alternative to democracy. Be careful with that, because in the eyes of a lot of people, the perception is that there are alternatives to democracy in a way that was not the case 30 years ago. And to the extent that we claim that there's no alternative to democracy, we abandon the task of winning the discussion. And we need to win the argument. Because for a lot of people, this is not obvious. You know, I just flew in last night from India. And believe me that there's a very robust argument there as to whether the niceties of liberal democracy are applicable to a country, even to a country like India. So we have to be careful with the notion that there's no alternative to democracy. I mean, I understand the feeling behind this assertion, but we have to be careful with that.
Right. Your organization produces an annual, certainly a regular report, Global State of Democracy. Your latest edition came out in September. I'll quote briefly one of the findings, and quote, in 2024, 94 countries, representing 54% of all countries assessed, suffered a decline in at least one factor of democratic performance compared with their own performance 5 years earlier. From that, do you extrapolate that this decline in democracy is a long-term trend? And the question I more or less asked to Alexandra in a slightly different context, is this trend irreversible?
Look, I mean, the erosion of democracy globally is a case of a death by 1,000 cuts. I mean, I could give a long list of factors that are contributing to what's happening. I'll pick 2 or 3 that I think are particularly relevant. Number one, this is, you know, I could make it very complicated, but I'm going to make it very simple. Social media is playing a toxic role in our democratic health. For many reasons, but I would say that the impact that is having in feeding polarization all over the place is a particularly damaging effect. Not to speak of the role that social media is playing in turbocharging disinformation and the demise of any kind of normal information environment. And it also plays, and has played, a crucial role in eroding trust in institutions, or trust across the board, not just with regards to institutions. And I guess what happens during the pandemic is particularly important in this regard. The shadow of the pandemic is going to be a long one in terms of the erosion of trust across the board. And a lot of that has to do with social media. Number 2, the second factor that I will mention is global inequality. And here, the only thing I'm going to say is that, you know, we tend to repeat this phrase, and I do it as well, that, you know, a big problem in terms of the, you know, the erosion of democratic sentiment around the world is the perception that democracy is not delivering. That is true, but I'll be more precise. A big part of the problem with democracy nowadays is the perception that democracy is not delivering fairness. This is a fundamental problem, and it's a real problem in a world where you have, according to Oxfam, that the richest 1% of the world controls more wealth than 95% of the world. So inequality, global inequality is a huge part in this story. And finally, the fundamental change in the international context. I think compared to, say, 30 years ago, the attempts on the part of authoritarian leaders or would-be authoritarian leaders to erode democratic practices, to do away with them, is met with impunity today in a way that was not the case 30 years ago. Can this change? Can this be reversed? I think it can, and it has in a few places, almost always as a result of key elections. Places like Poland, like Brazil, like Guatemala, like Senegal. That's the good news. The not so good news is that once the virus of populist authoritarianism has afflicted your political system, is there to stay. So no victory appears to be final. So in this cases where democratic forces prevail in an election, that's no kind of final victory, and what ensues is a twilight struggle in which there will be progress and there will be a lot of reversions as well. I mean, we're seeing that playing out in real time in a country like Poland.
Thank you very much, Kevin. We've talked about democracy on the continent of Europe outside the EU's borders. We talked about democracy more globally outside the EU. I'd like to ask Bart now about democracy within the EU's borders. I mean, I think it was Jim Close this morning who said the EU has an unfortunate predilection sometimes to preach to other countries about values, democratic values, human rights, etc., etc. How would you assess the EU's own report card in terms of its own internal democracy at the member state level? Over to you.
Sure, thanks, Paul. And thanks, obviously, to the organizers for putting this together. And let me also commend one of the foresight papers that was prepared as part of this conference on the future of democracy, a nice, crisp 28-page document produced by the Council's analysis and research team. And it provides a great overview of the state of play of democracy across the globe and in Europe. And the good news, actually, that Europe right now, according to Freedom House and according to the Council's paper, is the freest region in the world. So at least good news for Europe, not so good news for the rest of the world. But I think one advantage that Europe and the EU have is that it's actually a very, if you think about it, it's a very decentralized political system with so many veto players, so many decision makers, sometimes perhaps a few too many if you want to get things done. But in fact, what that ensures is that you don't get huge swings from one extreme to another. And because most decision-making of key importance in Europe is by consensus, that whatever the EU adopts ends up sticking. And so you do have a certain sustainability to the political system that the EU has almost magically put together. You know, that sort of reflects in the outcomes as reported by the Council's paper and by Freedom House. The other sort of advantage is that, you know, depending on your political spectrum, you might win elections here or lose elections there. Maybe your party's in the majority or in the plurality in the European Parliament, or maybe not. But there are lots of different spaces in which you can try to seek your political preference heard. And there's lots of opportunity for political competition at the local, national, European level. And so, you know, in some ways, Europe has sort of inherent competitive advantages to ensuring that it can be one of the freest regions in the world. Now, that's the good news. The other point that I think needs to be made is that this can be very fragile. And even if that's the state of play right now, there's no guarantee that that holds into the future. And the future of democracy in Europe very much depends on the outcome of the conflict in Ukraine and whether democracy is preserved in Ukraine or not. And that obviously is a much broader question that's been discussed throughout this conference already, as well as other fora. But it's tough to overemphasize how important the struggle is in Ukraine, because it's not about only, ensuring that you don't have additional Russian drones in European skies or Russian assassins across European territories, but then, the flood of Russian propaganda, misinformation, and so forth, election interference at a much larger scale if we do not prevail in the with Ukraine alongside democratic Ukraine against Russia. The future of democracy in Europe would look a lot different if we don't prevail in this fight. And then finally, maybe just in the interest of time, let me close with one other point that, a lot of times people, average citizens, policymakers, look to institutions to sort of provide the safeguards, either our legislatures or our political parties or our judicial systems. And all of those obviously have a very important role in our rule of law system, in our democratic interworkings. But fundamentally and ultimately, it rests on sort of inherent virtues in decision makers and policymakers, as well as citizens. There's a famous line by one American jurist, Leonard Hand, when he was talking about the spirit of liberty and how so long that liberty lies in the hearts of men and women, and if it dies there, no constitution, no court, no law can save it. And if it sort of is alive there, if it sort of is vibrant in the hearts of men and women, then it doesn't really need much by way of constitutions and courts and legislatures to help it. And what you see in Ukraine is a concrete illustration of that principle, that Alexandra and all of her Ukrainian brethren know precisely the difference between democracy, as imperfect as it may be, because they live and breathe the spirit of liberty and the spirit of democracy. Because for Ukrainian citizens, the choice is incredibly stark. It's either that or the hell that Alexandra pointed to. And so I think we need to keep this in the back of our mind that, ultimately, yes, it's about the systems that we have empowered or challenged by technology and other factors, but ultimately it also relies on all of us, from the policymakers down to the individual citizens, to make sure that we have this spirit of liberty and democracy in us, and that we do our utmost to try to defend it.
A very quick follow-up question, because I want to leave a few minutes. I'm told only 7. It's a bit unfair since we started a bit later, to the audience. Again, looking ahead, you mentioned 2040, which is the broad theme of this conference, and it's another way of maybe asking the irreversibility question. Are we in the West, of the victims of all this election interference, to be very specific, destined always to be on the back foot? Or do you see any kind of, even if they're very embryonic, encouraging signs that we know these things are happening all the time, but we somehow seem to be rather more reactive, which may be a very unfair comment on my side. But do you see any signs that we're getting better at this and we're getting more on the front foot as opposed to the back foot?
I think so. I mean, look, it's clear that Russia has lost all of its, or has not accomplished any of its strategic objectives in Ukraine, notwithstanding all the men and material that's thrown on the Ukrainian battlefields. And it's been the heroism of, first and foremost, the Ukrainian troops, Ukrainian citizens, but also, the support of Europe and European leaders, European citizens. You have something like 200 billion euro that's already been committed by Europe and European member states to Ukraine, another 100 billion pledged. You recall, scenes of, in the Warsaw train station in March and April of 2022 when Ukrainians were fleeing the immediate conflict. Average Polish citizens would leave their strollers and diapers and foodstuff on the platforms of the train station so that as people were coming in, they could at least have the basic necessities as they went on to seek shelter and some long-term integration. And in fact, now, you have a fight in Germany and in Poland and others for Ukrainian refugees to stay in those countries because they're contributing so much to the local economies and to the local workforce.
But
so in some ways, we're doing better than I think we would have been expected. And the illiberals, the autocrats, I think are on the back foot.
Forgive me again for being so rude. It's becoming a habit. I'm going to ask all the panelists at the end to have 30, 40 seconds to final remarks. So before I do that, we have a precious 5 minutes to ask questions from anybody in the audience who'd like to ask a question, a very brief question. Looking around the room, maybe we don't need those 5 minutes. You, sir, I would ask you to give your name, organization, a very brief question, sir, if you wouldn't, and if it's directed to one person on the panel as opposed to all three, that'd be very useful as well. Over to you, sir. Wait for the microphone, sir.
What is the time to act? Do we have time in the future to stop this post-truth society?
I will nominate Alexandra to answer. Did you hear that question, Alexandra, from the gentleman? I'll give that to you.
The honest answer, I don't know. There are different scenarios. And all my experience to work with consequences of mass violence during authoritarianism or during the war led me to insight that the collapse of international system of peace and security was preceded by collapse of ethics. And probably it's very obvious because how we see the world will define our decisions and our actions and will create one or that scenario future. What do I mean? We start to interpret very differently never again slogan. For Ukrainians, never again means that we will never again tolerate evil. We will fight with it. We will say never again to concentration camps, to erosion of identity, or to physical extermination of entire nation, to torture and to rape. We'll fight for the slightest chance for our children to live without fear of violence and have a long-term perspective. And this is not just words. We are proving it on the battlefield. But for Western societies who inherited their freedom from their grandparents, who start to take security for granted, never again means completely different things. For them, never again means that I would never again want to pay high price for freedom. Even if my life is under the stake, I would never again want to risk them. And this pattern of behavior can lead to different type of future. So I don't know whether or not we have time to explain people that, yes, we have no alternative, because it's not about rational arguments. People are irrational. I speak about the concrete feeling. What does it mean to live in gray zone when you have no tools how to defend your rights, your freedom, your property, your lives, your children, your beloved ones from the will of authoritarian leaders?
Thank you, Alexandra. I'm going to use the precious 2 minutes left to invite everybody on the panel to have 30, 40 seconds maximum, some maybe parting message you would like to leave the group in this room and not watching us online. And I'll reverse order this time, starting with you, Bart.
Well, just briefly, I think it's important to keep the faith and not lose hope, to somehow think that there's an overwhelming historical trend against us. Look, these things, you need to take the long-term view and play the long game. And I think, if you sort of look out over the next decade, several decades, so long as we do what we need to do, chances are that we will be able to succeed. There's a virtue of necessity in a way where we don't really have a choice because if we don't succeed in Ukraine and helping Ukraine defend itself and the free world against Russian aggression, then we'll be living in a completely different world. Freedom House will be writing a completely different state of play on democracy in Europe, and I think we need to keep this image in the back of our mind.
Thank you, Bart. Over to you, Kevin.
Thank you, and thank you for the questions and the comments. I mean, two things. I mean, number one, a key takeaway from this discussion is that information is a key battlefield where the future of democracy will be determined in such a way. And I have to think that unless and until we correct the madness that we've created through social media that is completely obliterating any kind of healthy information environment where democracy can thrive or even survive, is going to be an uphill battle. And number two, the fundamental case for democracy remains very, very strong. That, at least for me, is not in doubt. What has been thrown into doubt is this notion that we had 30 years ago when international idea was created, by the way, and is very much a child of that assumption that that we had in the 90s, that the global expansion of democracy was inevitable and irresistible. That's plainly untrue, and we know better now. And that's why we have to fight for democracy every day, because its expansion is not inevitable.
Thank you. I see a common theme emerging. And a final word to you, Alexandra. Over to you.
I just want to finish with these words of hope. I think we have to define the hope properly. Hope, it's not a confidence that everything will be fine, but hope, it's a huge understanding that all our efforts have a huge meaning.
Thank you so much. Wise words indeed, and a wonderful moment to take our leave of this discussion. I hope you've enjoyed it, and the audience are watching online. You have one small task, but an important task is to show your appreciation with a round of applause for our panel.
It's a thankless task.
Thank you very much to our last panel there, to Paul for moderating, to our Executive Vice President, to Bart, Kevin and Alexandra for joining. We will move immediately on to our next session, which, at least for me, is another one of the highlights of this afternoon. Joining us in just a moment, we have the pleasure of having Dr. Fiona Hill joining us online from Washington. I'll say a few words about her. And then we have, Henry Foy, Brussels Bureau Chief here of the Financial Times here. So a couple of words about Fiona. Dr. Hill is a Senior Fellow in Foreign Policy at the Centre for the United States and Europe at the Brookings Institution. She's also Chancellor of Durham University in the UK. Fiona has also served as Deputy Assistant to the President of the United States and Senior Director for European and Russian Affairs on the US National Security Council. She has researched extensively and published on issues related to Russia, the Caucasus, regional conflict, but also explored issues such as the link between deindustrialization and political populism. And then, right here, we have Henry Foy from the FT, so our Brussels Bureau Chief here, obviously leading coverage of EU affairs here in Brussels, and the lead writer of Europe Express, the agenda-setting newsletter. Over to you, Henry, and welcome, Fiona. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be here. Fiona, good morning, good afternoon in DC.
Morning.
It's a real treat to have you. You're a giant of the national security world, and right now you are a giant in the room up here in this huge screen, towering over everyone. I mean, basically everything that's happened and is happening right now in global geopolitics either crossed Fiona's desk in the White House or is demanding her attention now. in your research work, and of course with the British government as well. You've seen a lot. I'm sure there's some things you're not allowed to tell us, but please do, if you feel free. However, we're not looking back today. We're looking forwards and talking about Europe's future over the next 15 years and where this continent could be in 2040. So really, it's time to get your crystal ball out and to start making these big predictions. You won't be held to them, don't worry. There are three major themes that we're going to try and rattle through: transatlantic relations and what they mean for Europe's defense, economy, etc. How the war in Ukraine is going to reshape Europe's security, and the future of liberal democracy, which the previous panel touched on a little bit. So, Fiona, first up, Trump. Obviously, you worked with him in the first term, which we now think of as a really quaint time. Second term has brought unprecedented disruption, uncertainty to the whole world, but really particularly Europe. Blunt question, is NATO in danger? And if not, what will it look like in 2040?
Thanks very much, Henry. And I can see that you're having to turn around, looking back instead of forward in this setup with me in a very big screen. So I apologise. And I'm also very sorry I couldn't be there in person, as that would make it a lot easier to have this conversation. But yes, every question well, perhaps not the answers, however, seems to somehow revolve around Donald Trump these days. And the issue of NATO is obviously uppermost on everyone's mind. We have to remember it's called the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And in addition to the United States, as it's North Atlantic, there is also other North American participation in NATO, which includes Canada, of course. I know from various discussions just this very week, I was part of another online debate that included Margaret Macmillan, the very famous Canadian professor who's also a professor at Oxford, opining on how much Canada has been shaken by recent events, not least, of course, this ridiculous proposition by Trump that Canada become the 51st state of the United States. And Canada is also, like its European counterparts in NATO, reassessing its relationship with the United States. I mean, I would just like to say that Europe has been in this situation in many times in its very long history. We think about all of the empires that have dominated continental Europe and its periphery, including the United Kingdom from the Roman Empire onwards, that have forced, reassessment, some of those and those debates being lost in time, of course, but reassessments of its position, the need to kind of repurpose and refocus at many different points, create new alliances, create new arrangements. And that's, of course, where we are now. Of course, NATO is not going to be what it was before. There's a lot of debate about creating a European pillar of NATO that will involve in many respects, individual countries of NATO reassessing their own defensive posture. We're seeing that all over the place. I'm sure you've had many of the debates about this in the auditorium. The Baltic states, Finland, Sweden, reassessing where they are. Poland, of course, really beefing up its own defense posture, coming close to 5% of GDP spending and not even under pressure from the United States. Many countries thinking about different collective arrangements. There's the Joint Expeditionary Force, which includes the United Kingdom and all of its Scandinavian, Baltic, and other neighbours. There is, of course, this flurry of bilateral security arrangements with Ukraine that involve a lot of individual NATO countries, and the thinking about coalition of the willing to support Ukraine that also is taking place within some of the NATO frames. And then there's all these individual bilateral security arrangements, the UK and Germany, France and the UK, for example, and many others. So I think we're seeing, again, a refocusing, repurposing of relationships here. And NATO, in the format that it's been up until now, with heavy reliance on the United States, has obviously been in trouble for some period. Let's be frank about this. For more than a decade, there's been a really serious discussion of Europe having to pick up more of its own defence, going back to the Obama period, and for decades beyond before that, in terms of the United States exhorting European allies to do more. But yes, we're in a very different position than we were in the past, and I think this is the key period to make some decisions about where we head. Different NATO for sure, but still a North Atlantic element to all of this.
Thank you. Does Trump want Europe to be self-sufficient in defense, do you think? Is he going to give Europe enough time to get there? I mean, this is a decade plus at least, right? I mean, is it really something you think the Americans want Europe to be?
I think Trump and the people around him do. They've said it over and over again. It's a different matter, I think, when it comes to European, defence contractors becoming competitive with American defence. I think we're already starting to see some of that. And look, I mean, there's also, I think, the grumblings beginning about too much dependency on the United States in European defence circles. There's a lot of capacity in Europe. And I'm not sure that the United States is going to really enjoy some of that competition over time. So again, this is going to be quite a fraught process. And we can also see that the United States is pretty keen on intervening in European affairs. So, Europe finds itself and of course, I didn't hear what the speaker said on the last panel, but somewhat sandwiched in a very uncomfortable way between a Russia on the one hand that wants to dominate European affairs and the United States that does too, both in each case for their own interests. Those may be different, but sometimes they may also overlap. I mean, we're in an era where both the United States and Russia, and also China, but obviously not in the European context, are talking about spheres of influence again. Again, an old historic pattern that Europeans have participated in the past in their ways as well, and with their own imperial designs for individual countries, but a very uncomfortable place for Europe to be in someone else's sphere of influence.
I mean, also on trade, digital regulation, and on social values, the US is basically trying to tell the Europeans what to do and threaten the continent with consequences. How do you think that will play out in the long run? And from your time in the White House, I mean, was there always this idea that the US could tell the Europeans what to do?
Well, there certainly was on the part of President Trump and other people. And look, it's not just been Trump. I would say under the Biden administration and every US administration, there's a sense of Europeans as being vassal states. It's just sometimes more politely laid out than it is at the moment. And I say this with deep regret as somebody who sees themselves as very much a transatlanticist, and obviously as someone who's a dual citizen, UK and US citizen. Often I find myself in very uncomfortable predicaments in observing all of this. I had great regret about the UK pulling away from Europe in the way that it has, and I think there's a reassessment going on in the United Kingdom about all these different sets of relationships. But the main point is this is now up to Europeans in whatever political configuration this takes place to reassess these relationships precisely because in the United States there is still this idea of Europe as being basically an unwashed mass that can be dictated to. And I think people sitting here or there in the auditorium need to reflect upon that. Many of the former Soviet Republic leaders used to say to me, when I was very much focused on that kind of work of relations with Russia, with all of its neighbors in the Caucasus, Central Asia, and elsewhere, that Russia thought of them as shadows cast by the vastness of its empire, and I'm afraid that that's how the US looks at Europe as well, as just a shadow or countries that are existing in its shadow.
Yeah, maybe we'll just get the awkward bit out of the way. This is two British people having a conversation to Brussels about how America sees Europe.
Yes, it is a little embarrassing, but never mind.
Do you think in the next 15 years we could see the moment where Europe says enough is enough then, stands up to America and says, look, for all these decades of you treating us like quote-unquote vassal states, it's done, we're going to stand up for ourselves? A sort of a Hugh Grant moment from Love Actually. Another British reference.
And it might not be quite so pretty and kind of romantic as that Hugh Grant kind of moment either. Although it will probably also involve a rather strange cast of characters. I'm very confident. So hopefully people are rushing out to watch that movie again to remind themselves of how it all takes place. But look, I think we're getting to that stage already. Greenland was I think a Rubicon that was crossed there, which has concentrated mind certainly in Denmark, but also in Scandinavia, the UK and elsewhere. The Canadian debacle Remember, Canada is an ally. And again, I'm not sure if there are Canadians sitting there in the audience, but the Canadians certainly see themselves as very much tightly linked to their European counterparts as well. And you've got to remember that, even at the end of World War II, Canada's ties to Europe and also to the United Kingdom, and there were still, territorial links to the UK, were very close indeed. I think these attacks on the BBC are going to have some consequence. This constant intervention in European political affairs, be it in Germany and elsewhere, this championing of populist leaders that are in, Trump's own likeness, or frankly, close friends of his. There's going to be a question which I think is going to have to be answered very quickly, not just in the distant future, about how high a price Europeans are willing to pay to, remain in United States good graces. It is absolutely getting back to the point that you keep on raising, and I guess I've been circling around. It's very difficult. It's going to be a really hard transition to some different kind of relationship. There are still a lot of dependencies, but I don't think actually Europeans in the UK as well have done a full assessment of the ways in which the United States is also dependent on them. When I was engaged in the UK Strategic Defence Review, there's an awful lot of data, an awful lot of information that's produced, not just on the intelligence front, but, kind of in more practical purposes by the United Kingdom for the United States. The UK is a big hub for the United States in terms of communications. There's Ireland as well, of course. And there's a lot of activity that the United States depends on Europe for. So it's not just a one-way street here. And I think there needs to be a mapping exercise and a reassessment in Europe to, use that as a basis for moving forward and having a different relationship with the United States.
Jokes aside, I mean, there is a bit of an irony that sort of so soon after the Brexit deal was concluded, you then had the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine, which has kind of changed the dynamic of UK-EU relations, certainly in the defence and foreign policy sphere. Could you think between now and 2040, I don't want to talk about UK re-engaging and joining the EU, but do you think that relationship will just get deeper and deeper and deeper, or is there a ceiling on it?
Countries like the United Kingdom that made some pretty faulty assumptions about how benign the international environment was. Germany comes to mind as well, having based its security and economic policies on, 3 pillars of trade with China, which has also bitten Germany in uncomfortable, and Europe and the United Kingdom, to be honest, in uncomfortable ways. And China's just shown the United States they can bite back too. After the United States, Trump tried to apply punishing tariffs on China, it got a taste of its own medicine. So China is a very difficult entity out there to deal with as well. Germany also based its economy and energy policy on cheap Russian gas. That spectacularly blew up. And, Hungary's still trying to do the same as Slovakia. That is a losing proposition, just to be, very clear. So there has to be a reassessment of energy relationships within Europe as well. Right now, the UK is frankly very dependent on Norway, which may be a very different energy provider than Russia. But there's still a lot of vulnerability from being heavily dependent on, individual countries for, sources of energy. And of course, Germany had, like the UK and everybody else, the same dependencies on the United States for security. I could go on, and I don't want to just single out Germany. I just happen to know a lot about that case as well, having spent quite a bit of time there and engaging, with German counterparts. I think all countries are going to have to do a reassessment of their sets of relationships here. And the UK is obviously going to have to engage with Europe in different ways too. There was just a very faulty assumption that the relationship with the United States from the UK was never going to change, and that the larger environment was benign. And I think Europe has now worked up to the fact that, just like the UK has, is it's anything but benign, and there are a lot of malign actors out there, and there needs to be a rethinking of all these different sets of relationships.
So on the topic of benign and malign, do you think by 2040 there'll be some kind of sustainable peace with Russia, or do you think Russia poses a threat to a NATO EU member state other than Ukraine between now and then?
2040 is a long way out, but I think what we're looking at here is Russia that poses a lot of threats to itself as well. the kind of activity that Putin is engaged in is not sustainable over that longer term to 2040. Think about the demographic and economic and social impacts of this war on Russia as well. It's not just that Ukraine is staring into the abyss, but so is Russia. If we've got 1 million casualties, not just deaths, obviously, but people who are grievously wounded in Russia, and we've got this massive, demographic cliff that Russia has faced, just like every other country in terms of declining birth rates. And, you often see some of the posters exhorting Russians to have more babies at military recruiting sites. So it's just a in and out process in some horrific way here. I mean, Putin has presided over mass slaughter, not just in Ukraine, but also of Russians. The economy has become heavily militarized. The social impact in terms of people being demobbed and, rising crime, and all of, the attendant effects that one would see after a major war. Think about what happened to Europe, to France and to the UK and to Germany and Russia itself after World War One, and in that aftermath in the 1920s. And that's the kind of situation we're all going to be dealing with. There is going to be a long-term threat from social implosion in Russia, as well as in Ukraine, to Europe for the foreseeable future. It doesn't just matter how long this war goes on. This is already going to be a fact. So we're going to be grappling with the consequences of the war in Ukraine for a generation or more. That's just a fact of life.
Fiona, one of the sort of the flip sides of Europe relying on America for defense was that European nations, NATO nations, would be a global partner for the US in its expeditions, let's say, around the world, and a kind of security partner. Is that over now? I mean, if we can't rely on them to defend us at home, are we going to be less needing to help them out overseas? And how does that change Europe's relationship with China, with India, with Brazil, with other powers where sort of US rules were in charge?
A really complicated question, I think, because we don't know, what the United States is going to look like, looking out to 2040 again as well. I think this place is, where I'm sitting right now, is going to be under, its own scrutiny because, domestically as well as internationally, because so much is in flux here as well. I mean, this is an end of an era. The United States is not going to look the same at the end of whatever happens next. So I'm talking about ends here, but this is just the beginning of a new phase. And I start to wonder, more and more what the United States is going to look like, because, the center is not holding. Right now, there is no center. There is no, federal government in the same way that there was before. There is, Trump looking increasing like Caesar in his palace, more Las Vegas than Rome at this particular moment. The way that the White House is being reconstituted, and a lot of us are just watching in a kind of shock and awe. And contemplating, what this all means for the United States. Does that start to dissolve as well, as the states are forced to do much more on their own, where the federal glue has disappeared? And the United States, as the federal government, is going to become an army and a whole bunch of paramilitary forces in search of a country, or in search of reshaping a country, and that's not going to hold either. So I think, as we look to the future, that sounds very pessimistic, but I've been contemplating the end of our lives a lot recently. I just for my 60th birthday walked Hadrian's Wall, and there's nothing new in the world, and empires all fall and leave behind all kinds of traces, and again, we're in one of those phases again, both here in the United States and more broadly. So that means that Europe is going to have to think about its own sets of relationships, and the Europeans writ large, with the Indias, the Brazils, the Chinas. There should not be any desire to replace one hegemon with another. There should be a clear-eyed and very hard-nosed appraisal and assessment of those relationships. With Brazil, it's fairly distant, I would say, but there's also a lot of interactions with Brazil across the broader Atlantic, a lot of European interests there. But I think that there should be a proper appraisal of what that relationship is likely to be with South Africa, with India. I think India has a vested interest actually in the success of Europe over the long term, and certainly with the United Kingdom. And that would be a different relationship. It shouldn't be through the prism of the United States or Russia, to be frank. And China is going to be a challenge. It's not necessarily the opportunity it was before, but it's not necessarily the threat that it's as perceived as in that context of a US framing. But I don't think Europe should also want to see China forcibly taking Taiwan or any of these other, effects that China wants to have in terms of dominating the Asia Pacific. There are interests of European countries and Europe at large in that region that would be deeply and negatively affected by a Chinese hegemonic position there as well. So, look, this is a time for reassessment on every front.
Just on China, could you, as somebody who's worked with him, what does Trump actually think about China? Because people are very confused, especially in this town, because we're supposed to be sort of aligning with Trump on China to make friends with him, but it's very difficult to work out exactly what he thinks.
I think people in the United States have had that same problem, including people around him. A lot of people have gone from China hawks to, I think, equally, confused. I can't use, the wild bird analogies anymore because, you're an owl or you're a dove. I think they're just all in a Twitter. Let's put it that way. Feathers ruffled on the idea of, where is Trump going and everything. Because on the one hand, Trump clearly has great admiration for President Xi. And he sees Xi as a strong man, the kind of strong man he would like to be. I think he's somewhat jealous of the Xi-Putin relationship, which has a lot more depth and substance to it. Putin and Xi tend to see the world in very similar ways. Trump thinks he does too, but he sees the world in very personalized terms. And although Xi and Putin are both personalistic leaders, they tend to think of their states and they think of the weight of history of both China and Russia in ways that Trump absolutely doesn't. Trump wanted to be in a competition with China on trade and use tariffs in a way to, make sure that China wasn't going to beat the United States in that competition. I don't think he's grasped the technological natures of this. He doesn't realize that, he's everything that he has done has allowed China to have even more of an edge and probably, put the United States out of the competition for the longer haul in ways that he did not intend. I don't think he understands China, and I don't think he really particularly listens to any of the people around him. And again, there's quite a short-sighted approach to China here in the United States, not perhaps in the private sector and in the expert community. Many of my colleagues at Brookings, I think, understand it pretty well, for example. But I think Putin and Xi for Trump are transactional leaders in ways that they actually are not, and he doesn't really understand the dynamics in either of those countries.
Thank you. I'm very keen to get to the audience. There's lots of people not looking at their phones, which is really nice that you keep people very focused. But just finally, and I'm a bit nervous about asking this question because I've written down the future of liberal democracy. Does it have a future? And your previous answer was slightly negative on that front. Is there a way in which US-led liberal democracy is able to resurrect itself and again be a beacon around the world, or is it up to Europe to carry that flame, if at all?
Europe has to carry its own flame and really, deal with the problems that Europe is facing as individual countries and, collectively. Again, there's a lot of problems, and the United States right now is messing around in Europe and making those worse. It's fanning flames rather than carrying a flame of the kind of liberal democracy that we've always looked to the United States to do since World War II. It's just not there now. And frankly, I think the United States is somewhat in flames as well, using that metaphor, and is going to have to start from scratch. And I think we're going to see a lot of soul searching here. We're going to see in the United States a lot of attempts to reconstitute something. The irony is that next year will be the 250th anniversary of the United States as an independent state. But of course, the United States looks nothing like it did 250 years ago. I mean, there were only 13, states at that particular juncture. Places like Florida and most of the West Coast were not part of the United States. And the United States is the imperial state now that's in, a continued period of flux. The United Kingdom's been there, done that a long time ago. So, this is very much one of those liminal periods, a period of transition. And I think it's time for Europe and European countries to step up themselves and to decide, how they reconstitute their own democracies, because most of the populations of Europe and the United Kingdom and the United States feel that the current democratic systems are not working for them. That's why we're seeing populists fill the vacuum. And I think you have to start with basics and, think about whether our states are, in that British term, fit for purpose. While I was doing the strategic defence review with the UK government, over the past year, it was kind of obvious that UK had a lot of issues that it needed to fix, and that it can't just be fixed from the top or by, think of defence, for example, in a very narrow sense. We've got to look at the way that the Scandinavians, the Finns, the Swedes, the Norwegians, the Danish and others, think about these things and think about getting our societies mobilised, a whole of society efforts to think not just about defence and security, but also about how we're going to organise ourselves for the greatest benefit. So going back to communities, kind of thinking about, issues that everybody's grappling with there, transportation, social, well-being, you name it. These are all issues that are going to be on the agenda, and they are here in the United States. Look, this shutdown was all about healthcare. And about healthcare benefits. That was what triggered it. So you can see the same social issues being debated in the United States, but just obviously often in very different ways. So everyone is wondering about how they fix their societies.
Thank you. We've got hands up in the room. We'll take two at a time, just so we can be efficient. If you could be super, super short, that means your colleagues will get as many opportunities. So we'll take the gentleman here in the tie, and then the lady there in the green. No, I think it's got to go red. Does it have to go red? There you go.
Okay, good. Thanks very much. Brilliant conversation. Thanks for focusing it on 2040. It's really helpful as it's Europe towards 2040. But two quick questions. Number one, short term, how much is the influence of Bridge Colby now in the administration, where we've seen rumours running for months about potential troop withdrawals? That should have been decided in September, as I understand, but nothing is decided yet. Is there a sense of realism in the White House that this might not be such a good idea at this particular juncture of withdrawing troops, let's say in Estonia or somewhere else? Looking longer term, is it not the case that if the Europeans move up towards the 5% NATO target by 2035, that actually would reassure Americans that you have a transatlantic partnership which is a more unequal kind of a partnership, and therefore much of the future of the transatlantic partnership will depend on us and not just Trump?
Very nice, and thank you. The lady in the green.
Yes, thank you. Pascal Juncker from Luxembourg. I would like to ask a question about the North and the poles. The Arctic is unfreezing, so there's a lot of appetite for the resources that are hidden up there, and Europe being a resources-poor continent. What are we waiting for having an Arctic strategy in the EU, and what are we waiting for an enlargement not only to the east but maybe to the north? I'm thinking about Iceland and Greenland.
Two great questions. Well, three really. Fiona?
Thank you very much. I'll try to make sure that I answer all of these, and Henry, if I'm missing something, please prompt me here. Look, in terms of various personalities and people who are in roles at the moment in the US government, I'd want to be very kind of cautious there and not kind of engage in kind of any sort of speculation about individual influences, because ultimately this is a very personalized presidency. And even if people are doing their jobs and have a long-term planning in their current positions, that can easily be overrode and frankly also dismissed. I'm not saying there's any rumours of that. I'm just saying that is just the fact that I experienced in the first time around, in that quaint moment, which seems so calm now, of the Trump 1.0 that Henry alluded to. So it's best to look at these, as the second part of your question, in terms of these kind of longer-term trends, and focus on them rather than who's in, who's out, and who might be making decisions. Because again, there's a lot of caprice here in the actual White House itself. I think we should be still braced and prepared for the possibility of troop withdrawals. That goes back again to the first Trump administration, and that's this kind of desire to reassess the United States posture. And I think the more that Europe picks up its own baton, as you're suggesting, looking out to 2035 and 2040, the better. That spending, of course, of 5%, I mean, I've joked many times that Article 5 is now Article 5%. is symbolically very important, but it's what you do with it. And what the 1.5% of that 5% was supposed to be on resilience, and really taking charge of making countries stronger, individually and collectively. And of course, there's a lot of thinking about that in Finland, in Sweden, which are now members of NATO. And I think that, paying more attention to how countries can really fortify themselves, shore themselves up, thinking about transportation, healthcare, education and skills, not just about military capacity, is going to be very important. Because, when I look at some of the risks to Europe and to the United Kingdom, for example, enormous risk to critical national infrastructure. We see what's happening in Ukraine every single day. And you worry about those vulnerabilities. I was thinking, for example, 70% of UK gas from Norway comes from one pipeline, and the UK is heavily dependent on Norway for gas. So thinking about, critical national infrastructure and how Norway and the UK could work together, or the UK and Belgium, with pipelines and things, for example, under that rubric becomes important. The stronger Europe becomes, the more engaged European countries become with each other within that NATO rubric. Thinking about capacity building, thinking about pooling resources for building, for example, constructing an integrated air and ballistic missile defense system, that doesn't really exist right now. Thinking about counter drones, not just production of more drones. Thinking about how they can deal with emergency medicine and mass casualty events. I mean, no country, apart from perhaps Germany and the Scandinavian countries on their own local scale, can deal with a mass casualty event, for example. All of this is extraordinarily important. So I think, that second part of your question is the vital one. The more that Europe can show that it is capable of defending itself and being resilient, the better, for sending a signal to the United States over that long period of time, no matter where the United States ends up, because we don't know where the United States will be, frankly, in 2035 or 2040. And that fits into the second set of questions about the Arctic. It was always very difficult for the European Union to have a broader role on Arctic affairs, because frankly, the members of the Arctic Council were not keen on having the EU as an entity as part of that. I think what's happened in terms of this menace from Trump about Greenland has probably clarified the importance now for Europeans for paying more attention to Arctic affairs. I think, that issue of the melting seas, the potential of resources, which frankly will be extraordinarily difficult to access, just to be very clear about this. But in terms of the protection of the Arctic as a very fragile ecosystem, thinking about those shipping routes, which China is actively thinking about, the northern route as being another trade route for China, to avoid it being bottled in any of the other trade routes that China is very concerned about. All of this puts the Arctic in a very different frame than it was before. And I think European countries writ large that are part of the Arctic Council, that are Arctic powers, and there are many of those. I mean, Norway is obviously not in the EU, but Norway is a very important player in NATO. There does need to be a different discussion about the Arctic as a region. And look, if China can be a near Arctic power, so can all of Europe. There is that debate as well. And other countries like India, Japan, South Korea are also very interested in what happens in the Arctic, as much as a trade route, a sea route, is a navigational, from a navigational perspective, and also Canada, obviously, as a major Arctic power. So yes, this is a time for different discussions. There's a lot of interesting research being done on the Arctic, and I think that the Arctic ought to be prioritized in discussions and debates, because it is the frontier that is certainly being discussed by China, and with Russia having militarized its Arctic coastline, and having interests in places like Svalbard, and the role of neutral powers in that space as well should also be discussed. So absolutely, making the Arctic a key area of discussion is important, and fits into that second part of the first question.
Thanks. We've got time for two more. We'll take these two gentlemen here. First the man in the front row, and then gentleman there, the third.
Thank you. Pascal Ernini, European Commission. I have two questions regarding Russia. One is to know exactly what Russia wants in terms of there was no reason to invade Ukraine in the first place whatsoever. There was no threat to Russia from Ukraine nor from any NATO country. So what do they want to prove to the world with this invasion, and will it stop there? And second question about the sanctions. Do you think that's the right way to go? We have adopted 19 packages of sanctions in the European Union. Now the US is following suit with severe sanctions. Will it work, and will it change the course of events?
Severe sanctions with loopholes for Hungary, but yes. And
Thank you. Also from the European Commission, Manfred Rosenstock. You said that the dependence between Europe and the US is actually mutual, that the UK and France provide vital information to the US as well. And so recently I've heard that France and the UK have threatened to stop sharing information from their secret services with the US regarding the Caribbean following the US attacks on ships in the Caribbean. Do you think that this would really have an impact on the US? Thank you.
Do you get both of those?
Those are, great questions. Look, in terms of Russia, I mean, you're absolutely right. There was no reason for this invasion. This was very much Putin's own decision. It wasn't intended to be, as we all know, a full-scale war. And even a full-scale occupation. I mean, he never sent in enough troops. It was meant to be what he said it was, a special military operation. It went horribly wrong because he assumed that Ukraine would be a pretty easy target. He thought this was like 1956, you know, the Soviet Union moving into Hungary, or 1968 into Czechoslovakia. He didn't expect this to be, you know, World War III. And so he absolutely and utterly miscalculated. So there's a question what Putin still wants, because unfortunately, his head's on the line here, and what Russia, you know, writ large wants, which is a more complicated question. Obviously, Putin has great repressive powers that he's built up over time, so it makes it very difficult for Russians who oppose the war and oppose it, you know, quite effectively early on to really do anything. And you know, that effective opposition against the war, you know, was quickly dispelled because, you know, most of the people left. We've got so many of the Russian opposition living in Berlin or London or, you know, kind of Lithuania or elsewhere, you know, now. You know, who are unable to really make any impact in terms of opposing the war. And it's Putin himself who is really the obstacle here. Most Russian popular opinion trends, and as much as we can tell, in the direction of wanting the war to stop, but not wanting to have any consequences imposed on Russia, be it reparations or, you know, a reckoning with what they've done. So it's a kind of an end to the war with a Russian victory, you know, however it's loosely described. And I think a lot of Russian technocrats, those around Putin in the government, who have been, you know, trying to manage the fallout from the war, be delighted to have it end, but again, would not want to have any negative consequences to befall Russia, be it, you know, reparations or anything else of that nature. So, you know, part of this is trying to basically blunt Putin's ability to pursue the war, which is why sanctions and all the other activity becomes extraordinarily necessary to reduce his ability to pursue the war. I think, you know, what Putin is trying to show is that war wins. War wins for him and war wins for Russia, which would be a really disastrous outcome for Europe, because I mean that would create longer term instability and be a, you know, a dreadful message for global affairs. We've already got a lot of wars in which there seems to be no end, and this would just simply underscore that, you know, war has a purpose, particularly if you're ruthless enough and don't care at all about the human, demographic, social, and other economic costs, which Putin honestly doesn't. I think he is in a bind. He can't stop the war, so in a way we have to, you know, kind of be able to make it extraordinarily difficult for him to be able to continue it. He can't stop it because the whole economy now is militarized, and it was one thing trying to demilitarize the Russian economy at the end of the Soviet Union in the 1990s, and it's going to be much harder now because so much of the Russian economy has now become, as the FT writes all the time, dependent on the war. So again, you have to take away the ability to pursue it, the revenues, you know, etc., and put on pressure from all sources, from China, from India, from Brazil, from the Gulf states, you know, etc., just to make it more and more difficult to squeeze Putin so he just can't keep continuing. then there's going to be, again, as I said, a very difficult set of discussions and decisions to be made about what happens next, because Russia will be grievously wounded from this war. And whatever comes after Putin, will be very much shaped by, the way this war ends, one way or another. In terms of, the last question, about intelligence and intelligence sharing, there is a lot of data and information that's provided to the United States from Europe writ large, not just from the UK, France, or Germany, or other kind of major countries. And I don't think that that's fully been processed by the United States. The intelligence sharing, that's been affected now is in the Caribbean, where of course the UK, not just the UK, the Netherlands, other countries, have still a lot of information at their fingertips because of their presence there. But I think overall and over time, there will be a greater reluctance, to share information with the United States as the United States, continues to interfere in Russian affairs. I mean, this pressure on the BBC, for example. This isn't just political, the BBC. This isn't just about programs like Panorama. The BBC is a lifeline, for people across the United Kingdom and globally in terms of a source of information, unbiased information, frankly, putting, aside, all of this programming, Radio 4, in terms of BBC Sounds, podcasts and information, the weather, culture, sports, gardening, you name it. There's all kinds of small and large programming that the BBC affects people. I grew up in Northern England, where the BBC's regional programming is pretty vital, for people to be able to conduct their business. So this isn't, just an attack on a bunch of people playing politics. This is an attack on, a fabric and a network that keeps, the United Kingdom together in some respects. And will it be Deutsche Welle next? Will it be France, 24? And, or the FT, frankly, and, other, newspapers and things that play an important role. So I think, over time, these kind of actions will start to have an impact. And, people might snicker about, thinking about anti-Beeb or the BBC, but, you need to start to contemplate now that is a source of information. And it was set up in 1922, 100 years ago, as an antidote to demagoguery. Because, the BBC establishment coincides with the creation of the Soviet Union and the, the rise of that big propaganda machine that came out of the Soviet Union and then out of, the fascist and nationalistic states that emerged in Europe at that time. And it was intended to be, an antidote. Remember, George Orwell and other people worked for the BBC. It may have some problems, some serious problems at this point, but that doesn't mean that it needs to be attacked and negated in the way that we're seeing at the moment. And I think that should be a pause for thought in terms of thinking about that information, and there should be a feedback mechanism back to the United States. We used to look to the United States, and I'm sitting here in the United States still, as a beacon of truth and a beacon of objectivity, and we can't look at the United States in that way, and that's going to shape debates, and it ought to be a feedback mechanism back to the United States as well.
Thank you, Fiona. A grim note, but a good one to end on. I mean, I personally could sit here for hours, and I'm sure there are people in the audience that would happily listen to you for hours. But unfortunately, we've run out of time. Thank you so much. Such a treat to speak to you, and hopefully see you on this side of the water very soon. Round of applause, please, for Dr. Hill. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. Please stick around for the next session, which will now be introduced.
So, thanks very much, everybody. We'll just give them a couple of minutes to set up the next panel, which will be fully in person, so no need to watch too much on a large screen. And maybe while we're doing that, we'll have our second Slido. So, have they got the names up? Almost. Okay, super efficient. Well, maybe we invite you to come. Up. So let's look at there'll be a Slido coming up on stage in a minute.
each name a chair. So 5. And in the gaps in between. Yeah, perfect.
So you should have your name. Hi, Pavel, I think you're here. Hi, thanks. Okay, so our second Slido is up on the screen there. Let's have a quick look at it. So which factors from this list will be critical for the EU to harness benefits of AI technologies, AI, quantum, and other cutting-edge technologies? And you can click up to 3. So spend a little minute on that. Scan the QR code. And then we will have another 20 seconds or so, I guess, one other question. That's still on. Okay, hope you've all picked and chosen your answers, including those of you joining us online. Maybe while we're waiting for the next Slido to come up, I shall have the great pleasure of introducing our next panel. So this session, Artificial Intelligence and Quantum, how can the EU get the best out of transformative technologies? We have a great panel in front of you, all sitting here, which is great. Jerry Sheehan, Director for Science, Technology and Innovation at the OECD. You're very welcome. We have Araya Ibarzabal, Chief Growth Officer at Multiverse Computing. My daughters would love the sound of that. A leading AI model compression and quantum software company. Also very welcome. Welcome also to Anne Mettler, former Director General of the European Political and Strategy Centre, obviously a former chair of ESPAS and a very strong supporter for a number of years, and more recently Vice President Europe of Breakthrough Energy. And finally we have Ajay Jakar, Visiting Fellow at the Department of Engineering Science at the University of Oxford, and Course Director for Artificial Intelligence. And last but not least, Pavel Svoboda, Senior Fellow at the Centre for Future Generation and the European Policy Centre, and Co-Director of the Brussels Economic Security Forum. And Pavel will be our moderator. Thank you so much. Over to you.
Great, thank you so much. It's great to be back at ESPAS with an impressive group of speakers, including my fabulous former boss and former chair of ESPAS, Anne Mettler. So AI and quantum emerging technologies, they are everything, everywhere, all the time. And what I would propose that we discuss today in this panel is what are the credible areas of aspiration for Europe, but set against a good dose of realism and pushing back against delusion as well. So I think there are some options for Europe, gladly. Investing in sort of US-style AI involution doesn't seem to be one of them for the simple reason that it just takes an incredible amount of money, right? $400 billion invested annually in the digital infrastructure in the US. It doesn't seem to me that there is that type of funding available in Europe, given also a few other objectives that we need to cater for, to put it mildly. Then the second option is we can try to build a European technology stack with some modular, open source, sovereign solutions. It's not going to be the same, but maybe it can do the job and can reduce our dependencies. And the third option, which is the underlying one, is to really focus on diffusion of AI, namely make the best out of AI application in the different fields. So that's what I would like to ask the panelists about today, starting with Jerry. And AI is very much at the center of what OECD does at the moment, AI principles, the global partnership on AI, and so on, and the AI observatory, obviously. But when you work with governments, what I'm curious about is how much emphasis do you put on identifying these different opportunities that member states have with respect to AI, and how much do you focus on risk reduction? Because obviously AI brings both lots of promise, but also lots of risk.
All right, well, thank you. And I think, oops. Okay, there we go. So let me say thank you, and maybe my answer to your question in general is everything, everywhere, all of the above, right? Because I think one of the things we're trying to do in our work at OECD is take a holistic approach to how you have to advance on AI, and that does mean addressing some of the risks, safety issues, and concerns, as well as taking the needed actions to be able to actually to achieve the benefits and the opportunities that AI offers us for our economy, for healthcare, for education, all across our societies. And I think maybe the three pillars that we're working on now, one is continued work on ensuring that we're moving AI forward in a human-centric, values-based way. And this is building on the OECD AI principles and recommendation that you mentioned. Right? So we did update those just about a year and a half ago, reflecting the fact that a lot had happened since they were introduced in 2019, generative AI, agentic AI, and we've been trying to take a forward-looking approach to what is coming next. I think one of the opportunities we see there is moving from the principles. One is expanding them. I mean, certainly we have the European Union countries engaged. We've got the OECD countries engaged. But we're trying to take those principles and use those as the foundational approach to AI in a much broader swath of countries. We now have close to 50 countries who've adhered to the OECD recommendations. And you mentioned the Global Partnership on AI, which is something we integrated OECD work and the pre-existing GPAE, Global Partnership, also just about a year and a few months ago, as a way to extend the ambition around the adoption of the AI principles. So now we're at 49 countries looking for ways to increase the other number of countries that will participate in this. But the second step and the second component is moving from those high-level principles into, from a policy-making point of view, policy practice. So how do we take the ambitions around accountability, transparency, human-centric and values-based approaches and put those into policy practice? And you mentioned one of the tools that we've developed to help countries do that, help regions like the European Union to do that as well, is through our OECD Observatory, now come the OECD Navigator, where we've been monitoring what's happening now across more than 70 different jurisdictions in terms of national strategies for AI, legislative initiatives, policy initiatives that focus on trying to get more economic impact out of AI, focus on applications of AI in areas like healthcare, education, agriculture, and food production, and so forth. And we're now building on top of that Navigator a toolkit. And the toolkit is really there to help policymakers navigate their way from principles to practice by looking at what are some of the good and emerging practices that we see across this expanding pool of countries we're working with. We're trying to ensure that this works, coming back to issues of inclusivity, not just for the OECD countries, but it works equally well for developing and emerging economies. So we're spending quite a bit of time now in a series of regional co-creation workshops. We've been in Southeast Asia, we're going to Africa, we'll be in Latin America and in the MENA region in coming months to try to better understand needs on the ground, different challenges, resource implications, and again, trying to understand where countries want to go, what their ambitions are with AI. And we'll use that to flesh out, if you will, the toolkit that will sit on top of the observatory. So let's go from policy into practice. The third has been, and maybe has two pillars to it, is trying to ensure we get the economic and societal benefits. So despite the fact that AI in policy circles is everything, everywhere, every how, when we look across the business sector, we see that adoption is still quite limited. Most recent data that we have looking across OECD countries says about of firms with 10 or more employees, only about 14, less than 15% have systematically adopted AI. And of course, they're still big if we look at trying to have more inclusive and diffuse AI across our economies, it's still heavily concentrated. It's in the ICT sector, which is kind of where AI emerged from, and it's much more heavily used in large firms than small firms. difference of about 40% versus about 12%, 12 or 13%. And that's persistent across regions of the world. So we know if we want to see more inclusive AI, we want to see the economic benefits of AI, we need to move toward how do we encourage adoption of AI across SMEs, which means looking at some of the skill needs, some of the financial barriers, some of the other assets that you need to have in place to make use of good AI. And the second piece that we're doing, in fact, we just published some work on this for the European Union, was looking at what does it take to deploy AI in particular sectors. We've looked at mobility, healthcare, food and agriculture, and in manufacturing, and trying to understand where the opportunities are, where the European Union, and through work of the European Commission and other national level programs, are making good on the AI commitments that were put in place, and where we need to try to address specificities. The differences between privacy issues in healthcare and food production are dramatic. The needs for good access to high quality data in these different sectors to train AI systems and use them is also quite different. So we're trying to map out those series of differences to help deploy AI in effective ways across sectors.
Great, brilliant. We will come back to that issue of adoption momentarily, but I want to go to Anne because Anne has worked in the field of energy for a number of years now, and just yesterday we had the World Energy Outlook coming out from the International Energy Agency, speaking about breakneck demand growth for data centers and AI. So the IEA expects 580 billion US dollar investment annually in data centers, so a staggering amount. They also announced the age of electricity to be there, interestingly, 146 years after Edison's discovery of the light bulb. So what do you think we should make out of it with respect to Europe's prospects, Anne?
It's a great question. Thank you. And obviously great to be back at ESPAS. So I think the first thing I want to point out, also sort of looking back at my time as the chair of ESPAS and everything that I learned during my time at the European Commission, it's very important not to look at technologies in isolation, which we tend to do because this is how departments are structured. So we need to really have a leadership in technology as a policy priority. Why? Because, and we learned this, Pavel, when we were we were here at the Commission. The world is basically in a competition for technology supremacy, and I use the word supremacy very purposefully because there will be a winner and there will be a loser. And I think what defined technology previously is that almost without exception, democracies were always in the leadership when it came to technology. And this has very much changed now. The technology frontier has moved in a very short period of time to China. I think we're all familiar with the critical technology tracker from the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. China is now leading in 57 out of 64 critical technologies. That's a watershed. There are 3 technologies where I think it's not yet clear who will emerge the winner. One is AI. The other one is quantum, of course, and the third one is in chips / semiconductors. So, but you heard the other day, and this aspect of energy, which the Europeans have woken up to actually very recently, one needs to say, is really now becoming the decisive factor. You may have heard that just the other day, Jensen Huang, who is the CEO of NVIDIA, predicted that basically China will win the AI race, not because of computing power, but because of their energy supremacy, right? So this is a real problem in the United States. The US has cannot meet this demand, an explosion really of electricity demand. It has a very old energy infrastructure, has a very poor power grid. No one ever thought of this as being an issue in the digital economy, but this goes back to what I said earlier, is why it's so important that we don't look at these issues in isolation, right? So, and that brings me then to your question really about Europe. So Europe has very purposefully pursued a policy of scarcity, both when it comes to data, which is of course the fuel for AI, where we have made it almost impossible to work with data thanks to the GDPR. And secondly, also in energy, we have purposefully made energy scarce and expensive. And that's, of course, now standing in the way of leadership in AI. And let me say, I think we had a profound lack of foresight here, because we basically didn't see that data was the stepping stone to artificial intelligence. And Pavel, you will remember when we were at the Commission and people said, oh, we want to be leaders in AI, not knowing that basically it's really the large volume of data and the aggregation of large volumes of data that is necessary. Where does the intelligence come from? It comes from data. But we had basically designed a regime which made it very, very difficult to work with data. You couldn't repurpose data. You know, it was a very strict regulatory approach. We also didn't see that basically AI would depend on abundant and affordable energy, which of course we don't have, right? So we didn't see all of this, and even worse, we designed these policies which are now standing in the way to AI leadership. So I think what is important here is in foresight, this is the job of foresight, is to think of unintended consequences. We, of course, wanted all the right things and the nice things, Jerry, that you're talking about, you know, the ethical AI and all the, you know, we anticipated all the risks, but we didn't anticipate just how painful it was going to be a loser in AI and to not be at the technology frontier, right? So unintended consequences, that's really bread and butter business for people who do a strategic foresight. I won't say more about the GDPR. I won't say more about the ETS. But as I said, these are our policies, and I think it's time that we sort of have a very honest discussion about these issues. Just to say on energy, of course, it's important to remember that basically, in oil, we're paying 2 to 3 times what, let's say, competitors in the United States are paying. For natural gas, up to 4 times. Plus, we are subject to all the volatility of the price in natural gas. So that makes it really difficult, right, to build these data centers here. We don't have the abundant and cheap energy that is needed. You may have also heard that the Chinese recently said, basically, that they're going to make energy available for free to AI companies in China. Who can compete with that, right? So it's a very, very critical point that we need to think about. So coming back to strategic foresight, it is very important not just to have the foresight, but to also have sort of moments when you check in and say, did what we thought was going to happen, did that actually happen? And to have a very serious and honest discourse around that. And I don't think we have that built into the system. A lot of our assumptions have not panned out. And so we really need to have the honesty that is required, as well as sort of KPIs to begin with. I mean, oftentimes the public sector doesn't have enough, we don't have enough KPIs for the private sector, for the public sector. We anticipate that these things are going to, you know, somehow pan out wonderfully, but then they don't, and then there's no mechanism to go back and say, where have we gone wrong? What do we need to adjust? So I think there really needs to be a reflection in the process of policy making and how we do things. So if I can just have another 1 or 2 minutes, because I want to say actually what Europe should do now, and the only areas where I think Europe actually stands a chance in AI. One is industrial AI. I already spoke about the GDPR. It's very important that we don't apply the GDPR to industrial data. So we have industries in Europe, they are competitive, they sit on tons of data, they must be allowed to work with this data. Yeah, this is really, really important that we don't go there now and say, no, we're going to, all the legal uncertainty that we have around personal data, we're going to basically dump on you. You said, Pavel, the word deployment. So it's very important because we're not going to be the leaders in producing these large language models, I don't think, but we can use the AI. So deployment in industry is where I would look to, right? And here I think we need to particularly encourage partnerships between industry and startups. So what happened with ASML teaming up with Mistral, awesome. We want more of this, right? Because what it allows is basically in the industry to build the AI into the products from the beginning. And this is, in my opinion, is one of the key areas where Europe can lead and can also be competitive with China. Second point, energy optimization. You said I worked in energy in the last 5 years. Let me tell you, the European energy system is very inefficient. Very inefficient. So using AI to make these systems smarter is absolutely critical. Again, all of our energy companies sit on piles of data. Please let them use it to use the AI to really make these systems better functioning because right now they're incredibly inefficient, which takes me to my next point, energy efficiency. There are ways to build into the chip and into the AI model ways to become more energy efficient. Unfortunately, the leader right now seems to be DeepSeek, which is a Chinese AI company. I'm very disappointed that this didn't come out of Europe. We are a resource-poor geography. This should have been something that comes out of a European AI company, but not all is lost because, let me tell you, I circulate a lot among sort of really cutting-edge companies. There are companies today in Europe that are producing energy-efficient chips that have the software to make the whole system more efficient, more productive. So the job of the policymaker is not to sit back, but is to scout for what is the technology frontier, what is the best practice in Europe. Please do that. It's a lot of work, but it's so worth it because only when we scout for the best, we can build them up to be first European leaders, but also global leaders. And these companies are out there. Please pay attention. The scouting needs to be built into the system. And to the extent it makes sense to have data centers in Europe, it'll be up north or in the Iberian Peninsula, basically, because only there will you have abundant and cheap clean energy. So what that means is you will have a redrawing of the industrial map of Europe that may be painful for some, beneficial for others. But again, this is the job of foresight to do this. I will wrap up now, but I want to say that when I saw this headline in the report that you sent, and quote, the key role of AI, quantum, and cybersecurity in the global power game, can the EU remain a front runner? I found that actually very disappointing because the EU is not a front runner. And your job is not to tell policymakers what they want to hear, but what they need to hear, what they need to hear. Speaking truth to power is the basic prerequisite for foresight, and it's about time we learned it because the sovereignty we strive towards is bestowed on those who lead the technology frontier, not those who regulate it and not those who prematurely celebrate their non-existent leadership. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Anne. And with that, I want to turn to Ajit with a simple and straightforward question. How do we implement all that in the policy framework? And you wrote about this a couple of years ago in a report called The Digital World Towards 2040. So it really matches the title of today's conference, also 2040 Ambition. And there you pointed out that AI governance challenge is all about balancing innovation and societal safety, even though I guess we can discuss whether balancing is the right word, but against the backdrop of an asymmetry of information between policymakers and industry. And I think what we can add to this is also the pace of change, right? Governance is slow and AI developments are super dynamic. We have never seen anything remotely close to that. So how do we implement all that foresight, wisdom, which Anne just shared with us in the policy context that we have? I mean, do we need sort of a radical shift in how institutions are operating and designed, or will just mending things work?
Sure. Thank you very much, and thank you for having me here. So firstly, so you're correct about the report, which James Ellis, when he spoke to me, he said that he wanted to think about the AI in 2040, and he said, by the way, it should be only 20 pages, and that was a challenge. But the point is that how do you look at this long-term foresight, and which is the same question you have, is that what I decided to do was to look at markers, to look at AGI as a concept, not as a physical thing, because so many people are talking about it in too many different ways. So look at what does it mean to be if you have that concept. And we had 3 markers. The first one was language, the ability of AI to understand language, and that definitely is way, way beyond. The second one is the ability of AI to reason, and that comes through with a lot of the agentic AI and all that type of stuff, which leads to autonomy. And the third one was autonomous AI robots. Now, the most person talking about that currently is Elon Musk for various personal reasons as well. But I think that there is a certain tendency towards that. Now, when you look at that, the other thing we looked at was look at the economic, social, and technology aspects together. Now, that's quite different from a typical technologist, and I come from Oxford, and although I'm presenting in a personal capacity, I'm very used to presenting this sort of a discussion to my group at Oxford, because we are very, very keen to get the best for our students. And every 3 months or so, I go to my board and tell them that things have radically changed, and they've started to listen to me now, because it does appear in the zeitgeist that everything has changed. So how do we look at that? And this is how we decide. This is the structure we decided to do. And then we decided to look at 2 things, and they were motivated by various people from the EIF and others. And the first one was skills, and I'll tell you why that is important. And the second one was the impact for policymakers. And you are all here in that capacity. I am not a policymaker. I'm a more of a technologist, but I think that the value of policymaking is extremely critical, especially forward-thinking. Now, when we talk about skills, the question is, the sort of related question is, what did we miss? Correct? I mean, it's 2 years since we launched it. What did we miss? We missed the geopolitics. Nobody could have predicted the nature of the sort of the geopolitics which have emerged. We also missed how differently China would approach the situation. And I'm not talking about the supremacy. I'm talking about the engineering capability of China, and if you look at what the DeepSeek models are with that. And it bypassed some of those things. And then the previous comment from Anne, I think that we talked about Mistral, but Mistral created something called mixture of experts. And mixture of experts is used by DeepSeek, correct? So in the end, a lot of these things have sort of morphed into each other's knowledge base and worked with that. So now, you asked me what should people do, and I think it comes down to skills, and I'll tell you why. When people say skills, what do you mean by skills, correct? I mean, does it mean that you should be a carpenter, correct? Because a carpenter's job isn't going to be taken over by AI or a hairdresser or something like that. But I think that's too pessimistic. So the way we look at it from an Oxford point of view, and in terms of my work, in terms of reskilling, and a spin-off from Oxford, which is ADOSH, we look at essentially creating enterprise AI leaders, and leadership is not at the management, but at functional level. This is the first point. And in practical, if you break that down into 3 things, first of all, we look at hard skills. It's very easy to say that I do ChatGPT and I know AI, correct? And that's not what's going to pay you the bills. You need to look at hard problems, fundamentally. The second thing is, if you remember a few years ago, I've been here a few times, there was the learn to code stuff. Everybody from Obama everybody was talking. Today, we don't talk about learning to code, correct? I mean, it's not in the discussion even. Why? Because with AI, you can learn to prototype. And prototyping is a huge opportunity. Everybody with no technical skills can build something. If you look at companies like Lovable, I had dinner last night, I mentioned about a Swedish company called Lovable. Who has heard about this company? But not many people. This is interesting, correct? It's a Swedish company, a unicorn, less than a year old, and formed by 20-year-olds, I think. But it's an amazing company. Have a look at that. I mean, and this is the point. I mean, you think about This is from Sweden, correct? So you should all be familiar with that and championing them, not someone like me who is from the UK in an ironic way. And the third point I want to say is culture. Not culture as in inclusion, which is important, but culture as in having non-technical people work with technical people. Because there is a certain amount of superior thinking which technical people have, and we should break this down. We should try and encourage people who are non-technical, non-coders to incorporate them into a culture where they are able to contribute and make a difference. I think if we do that, we don't need to worry about competition. I think we will be fine.
Super. Thanks so much, Ajit. We will come back to that as well momentarily, but I want to now go to Iraya with actually two questions, because when we were discussing energy, I thought a lot about multiverse computing and the types of solutions which you are coming up with. So if you could enlighten us briefly about what you have developed, the innovative AI compressor model, which allows to perform AI operations more energy efficiently as well, from what I understand. So how much potential do you see there? But let me smuggle my second question right away, which is about the innovation landscape in Europe, because we're all entrepreneurial on stage, but you are representing a startup which received the Future Unicorn Award in 2024, and I checked before coming. You are on your way, so fingers crossed. I think the valuation looks pretty promising. But what do you make out of this moment of truth which we are hopefully living through? What are, in your view, the promising signals and where the hurdles remain? We had just last week, I believe, the meeting of Commissioner Zaharieva with institutional investors and pension funds, preparing the launch of the Scale-Up Fund. A super interesting development by means of which deep tech development projects will be funded through an entity that will be privately managed, right? That's a very important mindset shift, one could say, especially here at the European Commission. So what do you make out of that evolution at the moment?
So yes, let me maybe introduce a little bit the company, because maybe someone didn't know before about multiverse computing. We are a deep tech company that was founded 6 years ago. Right now we are more or less scale up because we are 250 people. The headquarters are in Spain, but we have also offices around Europe and also in Canada and the USA, the last one that was open this year. But for you to know, at the beginning, we are a quantum and AI company. We start working on the quantum side. We have developed a super deep technology that we can apply for AI, and we have discovered that we can make AI more efficient, and that's our goal right now and what the company is focused right now. So we are compressing the big AI models, the LLMs, artificial vision models, for making it efficient, sustainable, and make it possible to deploy it in industrial sector, in edge devices, in small devices, also in data centers for make it more efficient. So we are working on the side of the algorithms for make it more efficient and make possible that the AI is scalable and we can apply in all the sectors that are using AI nowadays. So the point that I want to remark maybe is that in Europe, in my opinion, what we have to push and to focus is, of course, on the efficiency and the sustainability of the AI solution, because as we were mentioned, we have not the capacity for develop these big LLMs. We have not the enough capacity, the investment for developing this. For example, in the quantum side, for you to know, because we have some knowledge about that and we are in contact with different companies, the Trump administration announced some weeks ago that they will invest between $1 billion and $2 billion in its company or in the most promises company that are working on the quantum side. So imagine we are super proud because we have closed a round of 200 millions last summer. So we are super proud, and we are working in continue working on that. But imagine if we have to compete with someone, with some company that has this investment and this support. So what we are focused right now is to, okay, we have no capacity for develop this from scratch. So we will focus on make it more efficient in a smart way. So we have the capacity, we have the talent, we have the technology for make it more efficient and deploy in a lot of sectors in an easy way. So first of all, what we need is work in a smart way, and be intelligent. Also, we need capacity, we need resources, I mean computational resources for doing that. We need to invest at least in computational resources for make it possible. And also we need collaboration, I think, between startup, big companies, public sector, research center. We need to focus and identify where can we be the best player and go all together for make it possible.
Great, thank you so much, Iraya. Fingers crossed again. Super interesting development, much needed, and also in an area which can become a European specialization, so to say. So that's very good to hear. Can we have the results of the poll from before up on the screen, so that we could maybe exchange opinions on Slido? Yes, I think we had the voting before, didn't we? So it's coming, okay, yeah. So I will, by the way, open up for questions very soon. But maybe once, I mean, while the slide is being uploaded with the results of the Slido poll, I want to come back to this issue of adoption, deployment, and basically the impact of AI on productivity, because, you know, if there is one promise on the positive side of the equation, it's the impulse of AI on productivity, and we desperately need it in Europe especially. The OECD has done a lot of work on this, even though it's early days, right? There's not much research generally about this issue. The impact of AI on the labor market is also in an early research phase, so to say. We're beginning to see what's happening, especially with regard to young graduates, but it's early days. So when you think about recommendations for member states in that area, Jerry, what would you primarily focus upon?
All right. Well, this is something that we're trying to put together now, right? It's a set of recommendations in particular about how to promote AI adoption among small and medium-sized enterprises, because what we do find, we've looked at this from the macroeconomic view and from a very microeconomic view, if you will, and both of those do show, you know, promising signs of productivity growth and GDP growth through adoption of AI. When we look at the micro side and look at firm level data, I mean, there is a very strong correlation between the productivity of firms that adopt AI, productivity of firms and those that adopt AI. What we're trying to tease out better, right, is the extent to which the AI, the correlation, which is the causality behind those. Because what we find is AI adopters already tend to be those companies that had invested in digital skills. They'd invested in other digital infrastructures. They have broadband connectivity. They have access to data. So these are for us, kind of the complementary assets that governments can help put in place and policymakers can help put in place to promote widespread adoption. We've also done some work, though, looking, I mean, within countries, within regions, at some of the disparities that exist, not just in AI adoption, but looking specifically at broadband connectivity. And again, if you want to have promote growth among SMEs and you want to promote growth in all regions, you want to see broadband connectivity across all of those regions. The data that we have now, looking at, again, across OECD countries and beyond, still show about a 40% gap in upload and download speeds in the same country between more urban and rural areas, right? And this is something, again, we can look at different policy recommendations to help extend, and we've made a number of those, to extend broadband connectivity more broadly across countries to remove some of those fundamental barriers. Because honestly, if you don't have access to connectivity, your ability to scale up and move up farther up the stack, if you will, from there, becomes that much more complicated. So these are what we're looking at, as well as, I mean, there's some still issues just about awareness, right? Thinking how can, for a small firm in particular, how do we embed AI in our company in ways that are going to improve productivity, improve our sales, improve our services, and so forth, as well as then making sure that you've got the financial assets to put into the investment that's needed. So that's kind of the policy framework that we see. Maybe we'd have to expand that as well. I mean, in thinking about the energy needs, although I think those are more surrounded around the big data centers and the compute centers, but ensuring that firms across the economy have access to those kinds of complementary assets will be important. Just the other piece on that, when we mentioned the skills, and I appreciate the comment you made about the different kinds of skills that are made. You know, we're also finding, as we track job postings around AI, that increasingly it's not just knowing AI, but it's having AI with management skills, it's AI with leadership skills, it's other humanistic kinds of social science skills that are becoming increasingly important as we move from developing that tech stack to promoting deployment of tech across a variety of different industry sectors.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jerry. And skills came up as number one on our list of critical factors, and you started to decode what that means. But I would like to maybe take that a little bit further and ask Anne, Iraya, Ajit what they would consider as most impactful here. I'm very fond of the term hybrid intelligence, which goes in the same direction you mentioned, namely combining the skills, the technical skills with the human, cognitive, emotional, social, creative skills, right? Now, this is a relatively new approach, so it still needs to be ready for adoption so that it really makes a difference. But I think that's the direction of travel. But I'm curious what the others think.
Can I?
Sure.
Yeah, sure. I'll just quickly say that I think what is important is we developed a methodology at Oxford, and I think one of the key things we look at there is the ability for somebody, and we kind of worked it as a part of our spin-off from Oxford called ADOSH. So we look at the ability to form a business case. And the business case and the value proposition and the AI strategic implementation, and it's not just at one level, it goes right up to from the top to the bottom with that. And the advantage of that is it empowers non-technical people to be what we call as AI leaders, correct? Because AI leadership should not come from top down; it should come from bottom up. But it's a famous quote from Donald Rumsfeld. It's like the known unknowns. You know, he used it in the context of Iraq. But the point is valid that if you don't know what you don't know, then how do you formulate a process? And this is the problem we are trying to solve. And I think it's a big problem, and it's an empowering problem to skills.
Great.
Yeah. Apart from the deployment, which I already spoke about, I think it's really the legal framework, which is perceived as extremely punitive in Europe. And this makes companies reluctant to work with these models. So it's very important to take note that with regards to the forthcoming AI Act, that pretty much every important company in Europe has signed a letter to say, put this on hold so that we don't regulate again before we're even in the game. Yeah. So there's something here about sequencing. The second thing I will say is that I think we need, from a policy perspective, speed needs to become a criterion. We are too slow, we are too cumbersome. All of these developments take place at a breathtaking speed. We are always behind the curve, always. So it requires really a different type of policy planning, policy execution with a degree of acceptance that we cannot control everything. I know this probably brings shudders sort of around the room, but it happens anyhow. You're not in control. You're not in control. And this is what we learned sort of from Digital 1.0, where we wanted to do it perfectly and control every risk, you know, with the result that others are now in the lead. Our companies are out of the game. So let's not do this, please. It really requires a reflection among people like this in the room that give guidance and speed and allowing for a degree of letting things just happen, allowing our companies to be in the game, even if we don't know how it will end, requires a very different type of policy making.
Yeah, thank you so much. Anne, Iraya, would you like to add on the skills issue now? I would like to open up if there are questions or comments. If not, there's lots that we still have to discuss. But if there is anyone interested in raising an issue, please let me know. Yes, please, Pascal. I'm gonna jump.
No, it should, okay. It moves, change colors. No, I want to raise the public acceptability of AI. Because, I mean, Anne, you referred to the regulatory framework, but it is also the reflection of the public acceptance or acceptability. And it raises a lot of questions about communication, about the positive effects, the fact that there are safeguards, or that the public authorities are there to safeguard private sphere, and so on and so forth. So, I mean, it's not an easy issue. And probably on the European side, we've erred on the side of caution too much in the past. We're trying to correct that with some omnibus proposal. There will be one next week on digital, for instance. But it's always a very different balance to strike. And we are not legislating in a vacuum.
Yeah. Can I respond to that? Because I thought very much about this. And as you know, I mean, I am not advocating that we put anyone in danger. But our thinking behind the GDPR was that basically Europeans cared hugely about data privacy. Today we have 50 million Europeans on TikTok. So are you really seriously telling, every young person is on TikTok, are we really seriously believing that this is the overriding concern for Europeans who engage with digital technologies? This is what I meant when I said we need reality checks along the way. We don't have any social media platforms. This is why they're all either on American or Chinese. This is the unintended consequence that I am talking about. So it really needs, at least among people who do strategic foresight, the honesty to see how things are playing out. It wasn't the way we thought it was going to be. So what do we do now? And there need to be places in public policy where we can have these discussions and not tell ourselves that this is what the European citizen wanted when they're doing something completely different. I just wrote about this. You know, we think that climate change is the overriding goal, but we shipped 4.6 billion parcels from China last year to Europe. So please, at the same time, we don't have a single pan-European e-commerce company. So this is what I'm saying. We do things with good intention, but they don't always pan out. And actually, most of the time, they don't pan out the way we thought they were going to. So then what do we do about this? Because the geopolitical environment is very serious. This is what I was thinking, Jerry, when you were talking about the connectivity. I can just see everyone like, okay, the Chinese do this the fastest, the cheapest, we need to build in these considerations. What about the geopolitics? What about our sovereignty, agency, right? So do European citizens really believe in what we are doing? And this is very important in discussions like these, that we have the honesty to disagree with one another, to have candid talks, to look at the data, what is it telling us, and not just prematurely think we're acting in the interests of a European citizen that today is totally dependent on platforms and on digital technologies that we not only not control, but oftentimes don't even understand anymore.
May I add something?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. So I think the question of what should we do, and I think one thing specifically with AI is there's one fundamental question here, and that affects all the data centers, all the data and things like that. And the question is scale alone enough, correct? And that is the underlying thing with everything. All the sort of, the bigger the network it is, the more data you need kind of stuff. But there are a bunch of technologies coming which are going the opposite direction. Most prominently, if you see 2 days ago, Jan LeCun left Meta, correct? I mean, who knows who Jan LeCun is? Very good. Again, I think you should follow him, correct? Very, very, very thoughtful person, very intelligent person, very well defined, and he had a different view of the world. And maybe some of these views are going to be valid. And maybe some of these views are going to succeed, and I hope some do, because then that would allow a different type of competitor to emerge, which does not exist today. That's just my thinking behind that.
Thank you. And Jerry?
Thank you. I was just going to come back to the question about trust, because I do think around new technology, right, AI, quantum, and others, I mean, building public trust is an essential component of that. And of course, moving in a regulatory direction can be one way of building public trust. But I think it's also important to recognize that governments have many different policy levers that they can use to build, right? I mean, some of this is about education and training and skills development. Some of it's about demonstrating the benefits. Right. So can we do things that can put and promote the application of AI in areas that are going to touch citizens in ways, of course, they need to be done in ways that are reflective of the concerns, in healthcare, in government services that they interact with, so they get some experience with them as well. And even as moving in a direction of regulation, looking at what can even be done in a voluntary mechanism. So we established something at OECD. We launched it back in February, which is a reporting framework for large developers of AI systems, basically the large developers of LLMs, to disclose publicly information about their risk management procedures. We had buy-in, we had buy-in from the policy side, because this grew out of the G7 and the Hiroshima process around AI and AI code of conduct that was developed there. But it was also, we brought the businesses into the process themselves, who saw benefit in it because this was a way that they were going to help convince their customers that they were taking steps. The other benefit is by having this information now publicly available, we've had about 20 companies that have contributed, and now we're trying to work to expand the scope and make it a little bit easier for even smaller companies as well to provide this information. It's also in an early stage of a technology development. It's also providing good practice. You can see, again, with the kinds of information that they were willing to disclose publicly, what kinds of practices they have in place. And we see this as a platform then that others can use to better understand, if we're going to develop an AI system, what can we do? So I think, completely agree, trust is something we need to build in. It's kind of foundational to work that we're doing on emerging technologies now. And I think we need to think broadly about what the instruments are that governments can use to build trust among the public. And they include regulation, but I think they include a wider set of policy instruments and programs as well.
Please.
Super fast.
Raya?
Yeah, super fast. About trust, just to say, I don't know if we trust or not in the AI, but the key point is that every day, we are using ChatGPT. So it's something that is here, so we can regulate, but we need also to invest. We need to support the companies. We need to adopt this solution. So both things, I think, that should go together, the regulation and the trust in the technology, everything. But we need also develop and deploy this kind of technology.
Another side to the acceptability question is whether or not we can develop trustworthy AI on top of the investment in gigafactories and compute at the moment, right? Because that's one thing, the compute itself, and we live in the age of infinite compute, as some call it. But then there is the question, how do you go about safety and reliability, and can this be the focus of European efforts to a larger extent, so as to build on that compute provision in the AI factories to arrive at trustworthy AI much earlier. So CERN for AI is an example of a concept which tries to address that. We have 5 minutes remaining if we can stretch things by a little bit. And I'm going to see, yes, there is one question or comment on the back, 2 questions or comments on the back. So if we could have the microphone there. Or I guess you can press your mic at the table, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Nadia Kowalczykova from the EU Institute for Security Studies. Thank you for this conversation. Today, in parallel, also the International Crisis Group is having a lot of conversations on AI and the impact of AI on conflict prevention or fueling of conflict and related matters. And I would like to come back on the regulation and accountability measures, because we are talking about how we are using AI, how we need to be using AI, because you cannot stop it, we cannot control it, we cannot control and understand social media, because they are maybe too big to fail them or too big to control. But we do have some regulation, including the Digital Services Act, Digital Markets Act. We also see how they are being implemented, but we also see there is a lot more that could be done to implement it. And we, I think, are perhaps thinking of new measures or other measures, while perhaps not using enough the measures we already have to hold certain actors, businesses accountable as well. Because my question would lead here to, the number one factor we have on our Slido is the skills. But we also see increasing research that while improving our skills of using AI, we are losing other skills, analytical skills, critical thinking, policy writing, writing text ourselves, thinking for ourselves. So how do we balance out these laws that we are also facing with the increasing use of AI? How do we make sure that we implement the legislation that we have to protect our citizens and to hold the actors accountable for breaches of such legislation? And how do we address also the ecological impact of the AI when we want to use it actually also to improve our energy?
Thank you so much. So let's have the second and last question, and then I will give the floor to the panelists one last time.
Yes, thank you, Frank Arnouds from the Belgian MFA, EU Strategic Policy Unit. Thank you for this very realistic discussion, but maybe I find it a bit fatalistic as well. For this analysis that our data policy and our energy policy puts us in a very weak position to have a leadership position. This probably we have to accept that, but if I see that we came to the realization that we have to catch up with defense and defense industry policy, that there we have to go for strategic autonomy, and that we decided that we invest 5% of our GDP on defense and defense capacity. But isn't strategic autonomy and de-risking on digital services and on information technology not as important for the good functioning of our society, that we should at least make a similar investment in this strategic autonomy and in those capabilities at the European level as we do for defense and defense industry? Because it's actually, this is the whole system that makes the European body work. Should we not make at least a big effort in that than we do for defense and defense industry? Thank you.
Right, thank you so much. And strategic autonomy indeed came up as number 2 on the list also. However, one needs to also make some very wise choices with respect to what really delivers strategic autonomy and what does not. So I would like to ask the panelists to offer us some concluding remarks while answering the questions in reverse order, starting with Iraya. And please be very brief, because we have run out of time.
No, I just want to say that in the quantum and AI sector, what I think that we should focus in is building something work in something in a smart way. So which one are our capacities, and work on that and focus on something that, okay, we cannot develop something, but what can we develop?
Okay, very good. Ajit?
Yes, thank you very much. So I'd like to take the question about the skills which was raised. And I think the question what we look at it is we try to think at how do you convert sort of developers to researchers. Now, it's a very specific approach to skills, but from my perspective, if you look at what is valuable in skills, this is the research type of skills with that, and AI especially when you look at the amount of money Zuckerberg was going to pay and things like that. So we are trying to build in those principles from ground up, and they're not very common, but that answers to a lot of the questions which were raised about skills is because it's the first principles thinking from critical thinking and all of that. Thanks.
Wonderful. Anne?
Mine is more philosophical because we talk about acceptance. I don't think this is really the job of people who do foresight because it'll happen anyhow, and it's other people's jobs to think about the acceptance. Your job is to anticipate. And the one thing you need to anticipate is in quantum technologies that basically whoever will win this, and I go back to saying there will be winners and losers, whoever will win this will be able to basically crack encryption, even of sovereigns, right? That means you no longer will have state secrets. So if democracies don't win the quantum race, this will have very serious repercussions. And please, for those few people in the system whose job it is to think about foresight and to pay attention to global trends, don't think about acceptance, because it'll happen anyhow, whether we're in the game or not. Think about anticipation. This is the job that I think you have to do.
Excellent, thank you. And Jerry?
Okay, and try quickly, so on the strategic autonomy, I mean, this has become something we are seeing across the science and technology space, across countries, across regions, and is the theme of our most recent STI Outlook. And I don't say that just to sell the Outlook as the book, but this is the big policy issue that's being wrestled with. I think what we need to do is try to understand what are the trade-offs that are involved in this, right? I mean, I have data. We've just issued some reports looking at the differences in investment in AI in the EU and the US, looking at investments in software and infrastructure and R&D. It's a factor between 2 and 3 in those different categories. So there is a cost associated with it. And that's what societies and governments need to do, is try to make those trade-offs. How much is it worth to improve strategic autonomy? Where are the critical points? Where can we rely on allies and other trading partners? And where do we need to build our own? So I think that needs to just be done from an OECD point of view, of course, in an evidence-based way. Maybe to come back quickly on the first question, and then to wrap up, because you raised a lot of key issues in there around the holding people accountable, which is one of our principles for AI, and developing trustworthy and reliable AI and so forth. I think what we're seeing is the AI discussion needs to take place, across essentially in governments. All ministries are involved in this. They need some central coordination. We're doing this at OECD right now, too. We have about 17 of our different thematic committees that are working on a so-called horizontal project on how to thrive with AI. We're looking at the productivity impacts. We're looking at the competition impacts. We're looking at what it takes to do trustworthy AI in healthcare, education, government services, you name it, to try to identify how we can advance on, again, all of the principles, but also how do we get the most benefit out of AI while being aware of the downside risks and mitigating them as well. So it is and it's multi-stakeholder as well. So it really is an all of society and all of government initiative.
Great, thank you so much. I won't sum up. All I will say is that this was, as far as I can see, 100% foresight and 100% anticipation. So big thank you to all the speakers. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much to Pavel and to all our panelists. Really stimulating and food for thought. And actually, it brings us very nicely into the topic of our penultimate panel, I think. Decision-making under conditions of radical uncertainty. Why foresight matters when disruption moves faster than policy. We will have one more Slido for you while we invite our panelists up on stage. So if we can have the next Slido, please, that would be great. And I think we're almost ready to invite you again. Hi. Good afternoon. Right, so let me introduce, in fact, our panelists. Have we had the slide up? So main challenges for using foresight over the coming years. I think some of Anne's comments provide a lot of food for thought for this question, so it moves in really well. We'll give you a minute for that. And I think we have one connection who will join us online. No, we should have two, in fact, so they will also come shortly. And as far as I'm aware, the Slido poll results will come in if, you'll share them with us, Trish. Okay. So, delighted to have here Jana Tapanainen-Thies, Secretary General, Government Report on the Future and Government Foresight Group in the Office of the Prime Minister of Finland. You're very welcome. Online, we have Christel van der Elst, Director General of Policy Horizons Canada. But Christel has also been a speaker at previous ESPAS conferences, so it's very nice to have you back with us, Christel. Pascal needs no introduction. He has been our chair of ESPAS, been with us all day. We have Dr. Kais Amami joining us from Rabat in Morocco, and he is the director of the Strategic Foresight Centre of ICESCO. You're very welcome also, sir. So, and Trish Lavery, who is our moderator for this session, recently appointed a climate intervention strategic foresight consultant at the Centre for Future Generations. Trish, I'll hand straight over to you. Thank you so much.
And good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here for the last session of the day. But we are not going quietly into the night under my watch, let me tell you. I'm going to embrace the energy of Anne in telling us the things that we need to hear rather than things we might want to hear. Because I do agree with her that that's our job as strategic foresight people, to sit with the futures that we find challenging. Because what a challenging time it is. We are almost certainly living in a post-1.5 degree world. That warming threshold that we tried so hard to avoid has been surpassed, and we are on track for warming of up to 3 degrees by the end of the century. And that reality is bringing a new set of questions to the table. How can we limit the extreme levels of suffering that a 3 degree warming world will bring to both humans, animals, and ecosystems? What does a 3 degree warming world even look like? This reality is putting questions on the table and giving political attention to ideas that would have seemed fringe even a few years ago, like the one that's keeping me busy at the moment, looking at the futures of climate cooling technologies such as geoengineering. Because it's possible that one day in the future, the use of these engineering technologies to deliberately engineer, rather than inadvertently, our climate might be considered to be less than the risk of living in an acceleratedly warm world. And if that's the case, who gets to decide on our global climate? Because these decisions are playing them out at a time when our time as an economic might in the West is declining. We're living in an increasingly divided world. The futures of multilateralism look increasingly uncertain. And we know that from history has shown us quite well, when our citizens are going through hard times, it tends to result in increases in populism and nationalism, a trend that perhaps we're seeing play out today in real time. Authoritarianism is spreading. The world now has fewer democracies than autocracies. And the erosion of democracy is subtle and incremental and increasingly driven by democratically elected leaders. And this makes it much harder to resist. And we've talked a little bit about the information crisis today and whether this is an irreversible trend. And I was heartened to see that the recognition that this isn't just an information crisis. Citizens are turning to alternative narratives because they feel disappointed with democracy. They feel like they are being left behind. And this brings an uncomfortable question to us as foresight practitioners and policymakers. We say we want diverse voices in our foresight processes. We know that that increases the quality of them. But are we making space for all of the voices that we're hearing in society? Are we genuinely including the voices of people that are going through hard times and might be turning towards populism or other movements because they don't feel heard? Or is inclusion only extend as far as the voices that we find more palatable? These are not rhetorical questions. They're the issues that many of us are grappling with, and they're the issues that many of us discuss over coffees when we meet up, but rarely in forums such as these. So let's not go quietly into the night. Let's tackle these in our last panel session of the day with our very illustrious and experienced panel that we have here. Fiona, I want to start with you. You're at the heart of Finland's government foresight process, a process that's often held up as exemplary. And you've just published the first part of the government report of the future in September, which really sort of sets out this very strategic foresight approach for really integrating foresight into Finland's governmental processes. But like the rest of us, you're trying to do foresight in a world where disruption's moving faster than policy cycles can keep up. So I'd love you to share with us, how do you maintain sort of long-term thinking when the political pressure is for immediate responses to these cascading crises? And how do you ensure your foresight includes voices that we might be uncomfortable hearing or challenge the political consensus?
So this is working. Thank you, and thank you for the invitation to be here at ESPAS. It's always one of the highlights of the year. And thank you for also bringing up the government report on the future. So this is something that the Finnish government does every single government term since over 30 years. The Finnish system is, the foresight system is kind of rotating around this government report on the future, and it has been changed now since 2 government terms based on the parliamentary resolution. So one could say that we are fulfilling the will of the parliament in the way we do the government report on the future. And this is exactly this institutionalization of foresight, that it's embedded in this official dialogue between the government and the parliament. So when the government, it's mandated to give this report every government term, and now with the change of the first part being based on the resolutions of the parliament, a whole of government, and one could also say a whole of society scenario process, which is then debated in Parliament. So we have this, one could say, a 2-layer process. We have the layer of content with through the scenario process done by all ministries of Finland. It's actually co-created, co-written by all 12 ministries of Finland. And we have extremely participatory processes. Perhaps later a little bit on those you were asking about, whose voices are being heard. And I think this is a very important topic of its own. And then in the Finnish Parliament, at this very moment, I was just yesterday in a parliamentary hearing, every single week now in the last a few weeks, been in parliamentary hearings about the report. So when sometime in spring next year, when the Parliament, the Committee of the Future in Parliament is ready with the hearings and all the other committees have sent their statements to the Committee on the Future, they create new set of resolutions, a new set of guidelines for the government how to do the report the next time. So I think it's really the reason why we are able to continue doing this for over 30 years is this embeddedness in this institutionalized system. It's the backbone of that allows us to do this work.
Jana, thanks so much. That's fantastic. I love that iterative nature of it too. Christelle, I'm going to throw to you next. You've got such a long experience of undertaking foresight processes both here in Brussels and in Canada. And your organisation, Policy Horizons Canada, has been tracking the future of sense-making for quite a while now. And I think, as far as I'm aware, it was one of the first organisations to really pick up on this trend that, you know, we're losing a sense of shared reality, and really see that and the implication of it of being quite fundamental to things like trust in government. So, Christelle, I want to ask you today, you know, are we heading toward a world in which, you know, people believing fake news might not be the biggest problem? It might be that people just don't believe anything at all. Are we sort of losing our shared reality? And if so, how does foresight processes work when there's less of a common ground to work on and when different groups might be operating in completely different information ecosystems?
Yeah. Thank you so much, and I wish I could be with you in person, but thank you. I'm still very thrilled. I've been following the conversations also from here, so I feel a bit there. Yes, we are losing, of course, a shared sense of reality, and that confusion between kind of what we think to be real and what is not is going to become more and more complex. I'm not sure that people won't believe anything at all anymore, though. But as you're mentioning, kind of the fact that we're living in these very different and non-connected ecosystems of information, it is contributing to that common, loss of common kind of reality. And it does change the way we make sense of the world. What we think might happen, coming to foresight, what we think might happen in the future and what we think is needed for the future, right? So, but I think it's only be part of the story, actually. It's important that we really recognize, and I think we've heard it in the sessions before also, that we're living in an area where there's like great paradigm shifts. It's really defining how we look at reality. And these fundamental changes, there's fundamental changes in just the underlying assumptions people have about what is true. There's fundamental changes in what people believe to be true. And there's fundamental changes in frameworks through which that we use to understand and interpret our world. And so it's completely changing the way people are thinking, behaving, taking actions, and having, what we think is normal, what are normal norms and rules in society. And that is because the way we make sense of the world is not just based on the information we're gathering. So we often hear it's a problem of misinformation. That's not the only problem. It's also how do we take that information actually, how do we interpret it with our lived experience, with what we're actually seeing happen in reality. And so we're spending at Policy Horizons, by consequence, a lot of time on looking at those very big paradigm shifts we're seeing in society. There's tremendous changes in our worldviews on the rules of international order. There's a questioning of our economic neoliberal models. There's shifts in how, very fundamentally, shifts in how we look at social solidarity, which has big consequences for democracy, for all the type of healthcare systems, education systems, and so much forward that we all rely on and take for granted. We're seeing diverging worldviews across gendered lines, and we're seeing, for example, young people having very different views on spending and debt than the older generation, how we would look at that. And so we think these are just some examples, but all these very different ways of looking at things, I think it's important that we do this from a place where we don't put value judgment on what is right and what is wrong to think. And on how to behave, and to just be in a very inquisitive mode. And we promote with our decision makers in the public sector to be, to that awareness of those paradigm shifts. Because for a couple of reasons, really important. Like first one just being the fact that as we're going through these big changes, and they happen fast, there is going to be frictions. There's going to be people who live just through different prisms, and they think differently, they understand what's going on in a different way. And at some point, it will jeopardize the cohesion between people. And you're going to have to live with that and manage that. But also, I think it's very important that we, as people in the public sector, whether we're foresighters or the decision or the policymakers, that we work across those information and belief systems. Because it's really uncomfortable, right? It's uncomfortable in these moments where the old paradigms are kind of shifting away and kind of these new ways of seeing and perceiving things are emerging. It's uncomfortable, it's challenging, but it's also a great kind of moment where you can maybe let go of some of the structures and beliefs that were frankly not very useful or not very, productive, and to kind of rethink things. So, conclusion of your question, if you want to do good foresight, coming back to foresight in terms of doing a good job of, trying to understand what is happening in the future, what we might want to happen in the future, and how we get there. I would say a good start is just recognize the reality that people hold just different beliefs, and they're not just based on data. They're also based on narratives and on lived experience. And that we are going through these big changes in how we look at things, and that we have to also maybe start asking ourselves, question our own assumptions and our own beliefs, and be more open to kind of trying to understand how other people are looking at things. And to just like make that effort to really go to the other side, to say so, and go out and look at other people. So, and in foresight, actually, foresight tools and practices have proven to be extremely helpful for doing some of that work. So there you go.
Crystal, that's so fantastic. Thank you. And I think it's a really important point to remember that, strategic foresight can be a little bit moderator-led, and we've got to be fighting against our own biases and our own worldviews, and actually hearing what we're really hearing from people rather than what we would like to hear. Pascal, I'm going to turn to you now, if I could. So, you've had incredible success at embedding strategic foresight through ESPAS, as the chair of ESPAS, which is a really unique inter-institutional foresight process in the UN. And you've really been able to put in place a systemic approach to sort of embed foresight in EU policy and decision-making, despite the fact that you're operating, as we all are, amidst this global trend in democratic backsliding. How have you built the flexibility to successfully do EU-wide foresight, even despite the fact that member states are bringing different perspectives and sometimes even moving in different directions? And when the political appetite is for short-term solutions rather than long-term thinkings, how do you make the case that foresight is necessary and not just a luxury?
Thank you. I may dispute some of the assessment you've done, because for me, I think it's a great time for foresight. I've observed that in the member states lately, there have been very positive developments. And some of our member states, which didn't have this long-term experience that Finland may have built very efficient foresight capacities recently. I can commend what our Spanish colleagues have done lately, what our Greek colleagues have done, and I can name many others. So I think there is a momentum where the political level realizes they need this long-term vision, analysis, and scenario, and so on. Whether they will always see, will they be pleased by seeing the result of foresight is another dimension. But I think we are quite fortunate, and also in the Commission, because in the previous mandate, the President decided that foresight should be part of the political priorities, and we have tried to really embed foresight into the policy making. When I started this job 6 years ago on foresight, foresight was seen as a sort of nice to have, interesting. I think we have to make it relevant, not only interesting, but relevant for the policymakers, that they are confronted with the sometimes inconvenient truth. You mentioned climate change, but other areas as well. Because as you said, we are all victims of short-termism. We try to fix problems immediately. I'm also doing better regulation in the Commission. And now we see after 5 years of over-regulating very, very fast in fast-moving areas that we have to correct mistakes of the past under the brave name of omnibuses that you may have heard. So I think we need collectively to continue this battle for foresight, doing our job properly, and I'm quite reassured when I saw yesterday the enthusiasm of young colleagues to meet at the Committee of the Regions to exchange best practices and good example of how foresight can help decision making. So I think all in all, we have the tools. Ultimately, it is a political choice, and we have to recognize that. Maybe one trick we've done in the Commission which helps is to distinguish and to dissociate the foresight scientific work from the policy-making work. And when I started this work, it was very important for the foresighters that their work was not sort of polluted by the policy-making, saying that we want to see these conclusions in your foresight work. And I think we've been able to dissociate the two and to make the separation clear that this is the foresight activity, results of the foresight scenarios and weak signals and the rest, but it's for you to take the responsibility. Don't try to mix up the roles.
Yeah, I think that independence is really an important factor there. Case, I'm going to turn to you now. Thanks for joining us online. So you lead the strategic foresight and artificial intelligence work at AKESCO that's been created with the support of 50 member states across the world and is the first think and do tank of its kind in Africa and the Islamic world. And I want to ask you, if I could, how you've built that. You're building foresight capacity across regions that have their own challenges, are experiencing climate change acutely, while also watching the global economic order shift. So can you tell us, how do you navigate building consensus across 50 different member states where shared futures sometimes feel increasingly difficult to imagine? And can you tell us too, does foresight look different when it's not centred on Western assumptions and priorities? Thanks, Case.
Thank you for invitation, and thank you very much for the question. I think there is a growing gap around the world between the abundant knowledge from the outside and limited local knowledge. Many regions still rely on external models and ideas, which means their future are often shaped by other instead of by our cultures and systems. At ICESCO, we lead the strategic foresight and artificial intelligence work with the 53 member states across Africa. I think 26 states from Africa and the Arab world and Asia. Many of these countries are already facing climate pressure, economic change, and social transformation. For us, foresight is not abstract. It is something we use every day to help countries stay strong and plan ahead. Our work always begins with culture and context. The core element of future thinking, like imagination, reflections, ethics, and long-term vision, already exist in our society. Our philosophy, our spiritual tradition have always encouraged people to think beyond the present. This shows that future thinking is not important. It is already part of who we are. That is why when we do foresight, we ask the right question. We call this value-based foresight because it's connected long-term planning with identity, ethics, and dignity. At ICESCO, our goal is to help our region take back ownership of their futures. For a long time, global future narratives were creating outside and did not reflect our realities or our aspiration. We believe real development must come from within, from our knowledge system, our youth, our innovators, and our culture values. We use foresight to connect this strength with modern strategic planning. We do this in three main ways. Building national capacity, it's our priority. Linking foresight with EI. We have many projects in this area, and co-creating future across 53 countries. So yes, our foresight is different. It focuses less on predicting the future and more in involving people. When foresight is rooted in culture, people trust the process.
Case, thank you so much. I was at the Asia Pacific Futures Network meeting a few weeks ago and heard very similar things about the lack of applicability from scenarios created outwhere and being sort of shoved on people without their ability to shape them through their own voice and with their own culture and context. I think we're about to see the results of the Slido poll, if I'm not mistaken. While we're waiting for that to come up, I might open the floor to questions, and I'll grab a couple of questions, if I may. Okay, we've got the Slido poll up here. So the main challenge, short-termism, absolutely, reactiveness, lack of diverse views, slow processes, political short-sightedness, the bureaucratic nature of things. I often think if I had one magic wand to improve government, I would just make every document have a little footer on it with the dollar cost in man hours that it took to create. I think that would be just one change that would change everything. Can I ask for questions now for our esteemed panel? Please lean in, ask the hard questions. We're in the final sort of 20 minutes or so. Yeah, the gentleman at the back here.
I think the mic is on, yes. Yes, Pascal, you commended the member states that we made progress in adopting foresight in our national policy shaping and decision making. But I'm wondering whether there's also not the room at the EU level that we make a stronger link between foresight at the one hand, which is already being done in the different EU institutions, including in Secretary General of the Commission. At the one hand, so foresight and also strategic policy development and political decision-making at the level of the Council and also of the European Council. So would it be possible, it's also for the member states to decide to foresee some moments in the decision-making agenda where we make a political commitment to look at the outcome of foresight and see how it really can serve policy shaping and decision-making. The Cypriot Secretary for European Affairs already mentioned, for instance, the format of the ministers of the future, which are the ministers of EU competent for EU affairs, gathering in a foresight capacity. They could perhaps serve as this link between the outcome of foresight work and the decision-making process, giving input to the decision-making process, but also perhaps being used as a tool of evaluation just to check whether the decisions which are taken at the political level are in line with outcomes of foresight and are also in line with the strategic policy documents which are produced by the institutions. I think, for instance, by the strategic agenda.
I might stop you there because I'd like to throw just for a couple more, but thank you. We'll take that question. Do we have any other questions? We can take a couple of questions before moving on. Any final questions from the floor before we throw to Pascal to answer that one? All right, Pascal, I'll start to you.
Maybe one word of caution. I would not. I mean, my experience shows that it works very well, foresight as it is, because it is not too much institutionalized. I mean, the experience in my institution, the Commission, is that we have, even structurally, brought together policy making and foresight in the same part of the organization. They were divided before. Now, since a few months, they are working together, and they should mutually sort of enrich themselves by defining the topic for the next year or the year after work program of the Commission and so on. So I'm talking for my institution. I think the beauty of foresight so far has been that we cooperate willingly between the institutions, that ESPAS, we work with 9 institutions, bodies, and now we have extended to the agencies. And we do not force anybody, because then soon, if you institutionalize it too much, you find into sort of ranking who is best, and then it starts making recommendations and scoring and all the rest. I think we shouldn't move there. I'm with you. We need to mobilize the political level. We're trying that with the pompous term of ministers of the future. So our General Affairs Council is meeting once every semester in this formation of ministers of the future. But I think they are still looking at the future, as their name says, but without concrete results or concrete impact. So I think the next challenge will be precisely, as you identify, to make the link between the foresight-rich work that we do together and what it means in terms of political decision-making, either looking at new challenges or seeing backwards what we have delivered good. I mean, Anne has talked in the previous session about the unintended consequences of what we have done in some part of the legislation, and I think it's where foresight can help.
Fiona, did you want to?
Yeah, just some examples how in Finland, now with the new change that the first part, the scenario part, looking 20 years into the future, is done and co-created by all the ministries, how it is feeding into the planning processes in different ministries. And I've written down some of the insights because I can't refer to all of them, but so generally it just creates, we look at 26 influencing factors. We have a 500-pager strategic operating environment analysis, and that is also co-created, co-written by the ministries. And then the scenario work looking in a very structured, systematic way at uncertainty. And they use it to form, for example, a situational picture, manage risks, develop preparedness and crisis readiness, identify research needs. It's used in sustainability assessment, strategic planning. For example, the Security Committee has looked at the report, and it supports the Finnish concept of comprehensive security. At the Ministry of Justice, it has fed into the comprehensive reform of the Emergency Powers Act. At the Ministry of Social Affairs, for example, in their work on well-being in Finland scenarios, also looking at the healthcare and social welfare up to 2040 service systems analysis. At the Ministry of Transportation and Communication, it's used to update the 12-year National Transport System Plan. The Ministry of Education at the future of Finnish comprehensive school education, higher education, research, and so on and so forth. So all the ministries have examples of practical use of this foresight insights. And we don't have to wait for the report even to be ready before it's already embedded into these other processes. So I think this is a very good example, kind of this, by taking ownership of that work, it is kind of automatically integrated into those decision-making processes.
Wonderful, Jana, and here we see why Finland is held up as the gold standard of foresight sort of integration across government. I'm conscious of time, and I want to end now, as you were talking about, a 500-word report, which, I love things like that, and we'll sit there and really devour them. But I work with a lot of politicians. They tend to be fickle, flighty creatures who have fairly short attention spans. So I wonder if we can just finish up with your closing reflections, but really share, because I know I have to do this quite often, but the elevator pitch of bringing politicians on board, of understanding why this is something necessary that we do. It's not just something we do because we find it fun, you know, to get up here and explore futures, but how we really explain the value and use and benefit to our leaders that might not have the attention span to wade in or even to participate sometimes in our foresight processes. I might go to online first. Christelle, I'll throw to you if I could.
Okay. Yeah, I believe that in a world where you have really radical change as we're in now, foresight is indeed more important than ever, because it's in time of crisis and certainly in this very competitive environment we're in now. If you don't have proper foresight, you have, I mean, any politician will say that, you have a high risk of policy failure, of getting it wrong. You'll see knee-jerk reactions, and you'll see decisions that are being made based on very outdated beliefs and assumptions, just because you have to think fast. You don't have the time necessarily to question all the beliefs you have and all the assumptions. And for me, it looks a bit like, it's like playing fast chess without understanding the game, without anticipating kind of what the opponent might be doing, and without having any strategic planning skills that allow you to win that chess. That's the game we're in. So yes, you can play, but what are your chances to win if you don't have the right capabilities behind that?
Oh, I love that analogy, Christelle. That's so great. Kees, can I throw to you now?
In one sentence, the future is not something we wait for. It is something we co-create with the dignity, knowledge, and shared responsibility.
Magnificent, thank you. Pascal.
I'm afraid you referred to the 500 words of the Finnish report. It's 500 pages.
Yes.
And I can tell you this is not the level of patience of my political masters. And 500 words might be much too much. No, I've seen something very striking this week. The NATO foresight group have produced a comic book. At first I said, oh my God, this is a bit light for such a serious topic as foresight. But I read it. And as a Belgian, I'm of course attached to comics. And I found it fascinating, because when reading through, you see all the foresight knowledge and insights coming through the comics and the different pages. So I'm not saying this is a magical formula, but I think we need to think out of the box to present the work of foresight, because I'm sorry, but the 500 pages long, you need to digest this into a much more palatable manner and attractive manner.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest challenge that I always think through, preventing what I call the in-shelfification of something. Oh, thank you, Trish. We'll just put this on the shelf here and never look at it again. Jana.
So I'll start by defending the work. And actually, the report that was given to the Parliament is not that 500-pager, but we need a foundation. We can't just take the insights of our hats. So we have to have a very thorough analysis. And this is the first time we've done it in that. And because it goes into continuous horizon scanning and monitoring of the environment, I don't think we will ever see this again. So this was kind of a one-time foundational work, and the report that was given to the Parliament was much shorter. But when we look at things, so when we looked at the future of China, for example, people who are interested in the future of China and they look at this 500-pager, they might find it, a little bit, it could go even more into depth. So when you have 26 topics across the pestle categories, you can't go too much in depth in any of them, but it gives a good outlook. I would actually then also for the page, future is a moving target. So we really have to be and take care of the capabilities and capacities to do this kind of work. And it takes time. And also we have to look at unwanted futures. So this is sometimes there is this strive just to look at the normative futures, the future that we want, but our situational picture is not complete, and our understanding of the operating environment is not complete if we also don't go and look at that unwanted futures to especially support preparedness. Perhaps on a last point to what you were saying, that sometimes foresight is a little bit difficult to perhaps digest for some. And there is a cognitive dissonance very often related to futures work. And there is a fallacy of realism very often, or the fallacy of rationality. It's very often, there were a mention of Crystal, of beliefs. When our belief systems are not in line with these possible alternative futures, but we still should listen to the future. Thank you.
What a magnificent note to finish on. Thank you very much. Can I ask you all folks to join me in thanking my esteemed panel here today?
I don't need that. I can put it down. So thanks to Trish for such great moderation, a lot of energy, and a really good panel. And thank you, the audience, for just being so engaged and on form today. It's now my very pleasant and I think final task to hand back to Pascal again and to invite Bernard to the stage to say a few words.
Thank you very much, Geraldine. Yes, we made it. I think it's wonderful because, I mean, I will not tell you how stressed we were at the beginning of this day because we had so many panelists who have changed their mind at the last minute, saying that I'm coming, I'm not coming, I will be connected. No, finally I will come in person. So it has been really a struggle. So I would like to thank everyone for the great organization of this day, for the excellent lineup of speakers we have had throughout the day. I would extend my thanks to the Committee of the Regions for having organized yesterday a practitioners' workshop, which I understand was extremely successful. And here comes the end of my chairmanship of ESPAS, because I was never a real chairman, in the sense that when Stephen Quest stepped down because he moved to another function, I was asked at the last minute to take over, and I did it with great pleasure for 18 months. Now we have a real chairman who takes over, who is Bernard Magenham, the new Director General of the Joint Research Center. Allow me to have three reflections. I think, first, foresight is more relevant than ever. And what I've seen this week with the meeting with the member states on Tuesday, then yesterday were the workshop and today's conference shows the pertinence, the relevance of foresight. So this is good news. Second, at the same time, we need to be humble in what we do. I mean, I'm really struck by what Anne said about the unintended consequences, or put it more bluntly, what we have missed in foresight. There are things we have not seen, and I think we have to recognize that. And third, this is really the enlightening for me today, is that we need to look beyond Europe, for sure. I mean, all the good things, the new things I've heard today were coming from speakers from outside Europe, coming with a different perspective, a complementary perspective, and I think this is something we collectively need to build in our foresight work. I wish long life to ESPAS, the way it has been created 15 years ago by James Ellis, who is still there with us. Thank you very much, James. And I pass the floor to Bernard. Thank you.
Thank you, Pascal. It's a little bit weird. As my first initiative as the chair of ESPAS is to say bye-bye and close the ESPAS conference. That's life. I hope that you have enjoyed this conference. It was really, I think, as you say, Pascal, a moment where we could confront what we do in foresight at the level of ESPAS, the European institutions, but also to look a little bit outside and to get food for thought for the next generation of reports and papers that we want to issue. ESPAS is a unique opportunity. It brings together, in a rather informal way, European institutions to discuss foresight and to work together. And under the leadership of Pascal, we have started developing foresight papers at the level of interinstitutional level. And we also connect with you, the foresighters. I don't like necessarily this terminology, but Let's call it like this. And I think that this should be done continue like this, because together we learn a lot about your reality, and we have absolutely no problem to share our reality in the future. Foresight, I would say, has nice days in front. Just to say the pace of change, it's not going slower, it's going faster. And the complexity of our ecosystem and the policies and the links between policies also is getting more and more complicated. So our capacity in Foresight to anticipate and to make then the link with the policymakers, I think, has nice days ahead. And I'm keen to be with you for these nice days ahead. So I would like again to thank Pascal, who has really raised as much as possible the work done by ESPAS and the visibility of ESPAS. I would like to thank all the speakers that came to the scene and have done today for us a great job. I would like to thank you, the participants, for still to be alive. We are on time, but you still look good. And last but not least, all the organization team, because organizing such a conference is not something easy. It's a lot of work. They have done a very good work. And I would propose for my three thanks, a big applause now to all of speakers, participants, and organizers. And see you next year. Thank you.
Microphone now. I wanted to, yes, it's coming. Thank you very much to Geraldine, our master of ceremony. You mastered the time and the organization, so thank you very much.
Oh my goodness. Well, definitely unexpected. Thank you very much. And completely unnecessary. Should have been for Graham. Has she gone? Okay. Goodness, great. Thank you. But look.